In the quiet hours before dawn breaks across the horizon, when the world seems suspended between yesterday's worries and tomorrow's uncertainties, there exists a sacred space where troubled hearts find their rest. Tonight, as shadows lengthen and the familiar weight of concern presses upon your shoulders, know that you are not alone in carrying these burdens that seem too heavy for one soul to bear. The very air around you pulses with divine presence, waiting to embrace your weary spirit with the kind of peace that transcends human understanding. Perhaps you have come here tonight because sleep eludes you, because thoughts spiral endlessly through your mind like autumn leaves caught in a restless wind. Maybe anxiety has become your unwelcome companion, whispering doubts about tomorrow's challenges, next week's decisions, or next month's uncertainties. Or perhaps sorrow has settled deep within your chest, making each breath feel labored and each moment stretch with the ache of loss or disappointment. Whatever brings you to this moment of seeking, whatever burden you carry in the secret chambers of your heart, there is wisdom available to you that reaches back through centuries of human struggle and divine faithfulness. The book of Proverbs was written by those who understood the weight of human worry, the complexity of difficult decisions, and the longing for peace that resides in every heart. King Solomon, blessed with wisdom beyond measure, looked upon the struggles of his people and saw reflections of struggles that would echo through generations yet unborn. He saw mothers lying awake at night, wondering if they were raising their children well, fathers questioning whether their work would provide security for their families, young people standing at crossroads with no clear sense of which path would lead to fulfillment, and elderly souls wondering if their lives had mattered in the grand tapestry of existence. Tonight, as you settle into this sacred time of listening and learning, imagine yourself walking through ancient olive groves under a canopy of stars that have witnessed countless generations of seekers just like you. The ground beneath your feet is soft with fallen leaves that crunch gently with each step, and the air carries the sweet fragrance of jasmine, blooming somewhere in the distance. This is not just a physical journey, but a spiritual pilgrimage toward the kind of wisdom that can transform worry into trust, confusion into clarity, and restless hearts into vessels of perfect peace. The wisdom literature of Scripture speaks to us across millennia because human nature remains fundamentally unchanged. We still wrestle with the same core fears that plagued our ancestors. The fear of not having enough, the fear of making wrong choices, the fear of being forgotten or unloved, the fear of suffering, and the ultimate fear of death itself. But woven throughout these ancient texts is a golden thread of divine truth that offers something remarkable. The promise that wisdom is not reserved for the intellectually gifted or the spiritually elite, but is freely offered to anyone who genuinely seeks it with a humble heart. As we journey together through the treasures of Proverbs tonight, you will discover that each verse is like a carefully cut gem, multifaceted and brilliant, reflecting different aspects of divine truth depending on the angle from which you view it. Some passages will speak directly to your current circumstances, offering practical guidance for immediate decisions. Others will plant seeds of understanding that will bloom into insight weeks or months from now, when you find yourself facing challenges you cannot yet imagine. Still others will simply wash over your spirit like gentle rain on parched ground, bringing refreshment to places within you that have been dry for far too long. The Hebrew word for wisdom, chokmah, carries within it the idea of skillful living. It is not merely academic knowledge or philosophical understanding, but the kind of practical wisdom that enables a person to navigate life's complexities with grace, integrity, and peace. Think of a master craftsman who has spent decades perfecting their art. Their hands know exactly how much pressure to apply, when to be gentle and when to be firm, how to work with the natural grain of the wood rather than against it. This is the kind of wisdom that Proverbs offers, the ability to work with the grain of God's design for human flourishing rather than fighting against it in futile rebellion or anxious striving. Tonight, as your body begins to relax and your breathing deepens into the rhythm of rest, allow your mind to release its grip on the specific worries that brought you here. There will be time tomorrow to address practical concerns, to make necessary phone calls, to have difficult conversations, or to take concrete steps toward solutions. But this time, these precious hours of darkness belong to a different kind of work, the soul work of receiving divine wisdom and allowing it to reshape your perspective on whatever challenges await. Consider the lily of the field, Jesus said, how they grow without toiling or spinning. Yet even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. There is something profoundly comforting about this image when anxiety threatens to overwhelm us. The lily do not lie awake at night, worrying about tomorrow's weather, or whether there will be sufficient rain for their needs. They simply receive what each day brings, drawing sustenance from soil and sunlight, opening their petals to display beauty that serves no utilitarian purpose except to reflect the creative joy of their maker. This is not to suggest that we should be passive or irresponsible in our approach to life's challenges. The book of Proverbs actually contains much practical advice about diligent work, careful planning, and wise decision-making. But there is a crucial difference between responsible action rooted in trust and anxious striving rooted in fear. The wise person works diligently, but rests peacefully, plans carefully, but holds outcomes lightly, cares deeply about important matters, but refuses to be consumed by worry about things beyond their control. As we prepare to dive deeper into specific passages from Proverbs, imagine your worries as heavy stones that you have been carrying in a backpack during a long journey. One by one, as wisdom penetrates your understanding, you can set these stones down beside the path. You need not forget your responsibilities or become indifferent to legitimate concerns, but you can release the exhausting burden of trying to control outcomes that ultimately rest in divine hands. The stones may still be there tomorrow if you need to pick them up again, but tonight they can rest beside the path while you journey onward with lighter steps. The first treasure we encounter comes from Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, words that have echoed through countless hearts seeking direction. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. These familiar words carry depth that only reveals itself to those who have walked through seasons of genuine confusion and uncertainty, who have felt the limitations of human wisdom pressing against the complexity of life's challenges. To trust with all your heart means something far deeper than intellectual assent to theological propositions about God's faithfulness. It means allowing the deepest parts of yourself, the parts that house your most vulnerable hopes and fears, to rest in the character of one whose love for you is not dependent on your performance or even your ability to understand his ways. Think of a child falling asleep in the back seat of a car during a long nighttime journey. The child does not need to understand the route or watch for road signs or worry about traffic conditions. The child simply rests in complete confidence that someone competent and caring is handling the navigation. This kind of trust develops not through forced effort or positive thinking, but through accumulated experience of God's faithfulness in small matters and large ones, in seasons of plenty and seasons of want, in times of clarity and times of bewildering confusion. Every time you have found strength you did not know you possessed, wisdom you did not think you had, peace in circumstances that should have produced panic, or provision that came from unexpected sources, you are building a foundation of trust that can support you through whatever challenges lie ahead. The instruction to lean not on your own understanding is perhaps one of the most countercultural directives in all of Scripture. We live in an age that prizes intellectual independence, that encourages us to trust our instincts, follow our hearts, and believe in ourselves above all else. While human reason and intuition are certainly gifts to be valued and developed, the writer of Proverbs recognized something that modern culture often overlooks. Our understanding is necessarily limited by our perspective, our experience, and our fallen nature's tendency toward self-deception. Imagine standing in a vast maze made of hedges that tower high above your head. From your position on the ground, you can see only a few feet in any direction. The path that seems to lead toward your destination may actually wind back to where you started or end in a frustrating dead end. But someone standing on a tower above the maze can see the entire layout, can identify the true path to the exit, and can guide you through what would otherwise be an impossible puzzle. This is the difference between human understanding and divine wisdom. We see only our immediate circumstances and the limited options visible from our current vantage point, while God sees the entire landscape of our lives, understanding how present struggles connect to future victories, how apparent setbacks serve ultimate purposes, and how seemingly random events weave together in patterns of meaning that will only become clear in retrospect. The promise that God will make your path straight does not mean that your journey will be without challenges, delays, or unexpected detours. Rather, it means that as you maintain an attitude of trust and acknowledgement of His sovereignty, you will find yourself moving in directions that serve His purposes for your life, even when those directions seem puzzling or uncomfortable from your limited perspective. Sometimes the straight path is not the shortest path or the most comfortable path, but it is always the path that leads to the fullest expression of who you were created to be. In the gentle darkness that surrounds you now, as your breathing settles into the peaceful rhythm of approaching sleep, allow these words to sink deep into your spirit. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Feel your shoulders relaxing as you release the burden of needing to figure everything out, of needing to see the entire journey before taking the next step. Lean not on your own understanding. Notice how this release of the need to control and comprehend brings a sense of spaciousness to your chest, allowing deeper, more restful breathing. In all your ways acknowledge Him. This acknowledgement is not a desperate plea for help, but a peaceful recognition of His presence in every aspect of your existence, from the most significant life decisions to the smallest daily choices. And He will make your path straight. Rest in this promise as you rest your body, trusting that divine wisdom is at work in ways that transcend your ability to perceive or understand. Another gem from this treasure house of wisdom appears in Proverbs chapter 16, verse 9. In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. This verse speaks directly to those who lie awake at night, making and remaking plans, trying to anticipate every possible scenario and prepare for every contingency. There is wisdom in planning, and the book of Proverbs actually encouraged thoughtful preparation and diligent work. But there is also profound peace in recognizing that our best laid plans are held lightly in hands much larger and more capable than our own. Picture a master choreographer working with a talented dancer. The dancer brings skill, dedication, and creative interpretation to the performance, but the choreographer provides the overall vision, the structure within which the dancer's gifts can find their fullest expression. The dancer does not simply wait passively for direction in every moment, but neither does the dancer ignore the choreographer's guidance in favor of improvising the entire routine. There is a beautiful collaboration between human effort and divine direction, between our planning and God's establishing of our steps. This divine choreography becomes evident when we look back over the paths our lives have taken. Opportunities appeared at just the right moment. Seemingly chance encounters led to significant relationships. Doors closed that we desperately wanted to walk through, only to reveal better doors we had not yet imagined. And skills we developed in one context became exactly what we needed for unexpected challenges in completely different circumstances. These are not mere coincidences, but evidences of the Lord establishing our steps, even as we made our plans with sincere hearts and diligent minds. The Hebrew word translated as establishes in this verse carries the idea of making firm, of providing stability and sure foundation. When the Lord establishes our steps, He is not merely allowing us to wander wherever our whims might take us, but is actively working to ensure that our journey serves purposes far grander than we could conceive on our own. This does not diminish the importance of our choices, or reduce us to puppets in some cosmic performance. Rather, it elevates our daily decisions to participation in a divine drama of redemption and restoration that spans generations. Tonight, as you consider the plans that have been occupying your mind, the decisions you need to make in the coming days or weeks, the goals you have set for yourself, or the dreams you carry in your heart, take comfort in knowing that your planning is not a burden you must bear alone. Plan thoughtfully, research carefully, seek wise counsel from trusted friends, and make decisions with integrity and faith. But hold your plans lightly, recognizing that the one who establishes your steps may have destinations in mind that are more wonderful than anything you could plan for yourself. Sometimes the Lord establishes our steps by opening doors we had not thought to knock on. Sometimes He does so by closing doors we were certain we were meant to walk through, redirecting our energy toward opportunities that better align with His purposes. Sometimes He establishes our steps by allowing us to walk through seasons of uncertainty or difficulty that develop character qualities we will need for future challenges we cannot yet imagine. And sometimes He simply confirms the plans we have made, providing resources and opportunities that exceed our expectations and demonstrate His pleasure in the direction we have chosen. The key to experiencing peace in the midst of planning is learning to distinguish between diligent preparation and anxious striving. Diligent preparation flows from trust in God's sovereignty and results in practical action taken with an open hand, ready to adjust course as circumstances change. Anxious striving flows from a sense that everything depends on our ability to control outcomes and results in frantic activity that exhausts both body and spirit. The difference is not always visible in the external actions, but is always evident in the internal state of the heart. Peace versus anxiety, trust versus control, collaboration with divine purposes versus desperate attempts to force desired outcomes. As you feel your body sinking deeper into rest, imagine laying your plans and concerns before the Lord like a child showing a beloved parent a carefully crafted drawing or project. The parent delights in the child's effort and creativity while also seeing possibilities for improvement or different directions that the child cannot yet perceive. Your planning and goal setting bring pleasure to your Heavenly Father, not because they demonstrate your independence, but because they reflect your desire to be faithful with the gifts and opportunities He has entrusted to you. And just as a loving parent guides a child's creative efforts toward their highest expression, so the Lord takes pleasure in establishing your steps in ways that bring out the fullest potential of who He created you to be. From the 14th chapter of Proverbs comes another verse that speaks directly to anxious hearts. Even in laughter, the heart may ache, and rejoicing may end in grief. This observation might initially seem discouraging rather than comforting, but it actually offers profound consolation to those who struggle with sorrow or anxiety, even in the midst of what should be happy times. The writer of Proverbs understood something that our culture often denies: the complexity of human emotion and the reality that surface experiences do not always reflect the deeper currents of the heart. How many times have you smiled and engaged in pleasant conversation while carrying a burden of worry or sadness that felt almost too heavy to bear? How often have you participated in celebrations or social gatherings while feeling isolated by concerns that others could not see or understand? The wisdom of Proverbs validates these experiences rather than dismissing them as signs of weakness or lack of faith. The heart may indeed ache even in moments of laughter, and this aching is not necessarily evidence of spiritual failure, but simply evidence of the broken world in which we live and the complex emotional landscape of human existence. This verse also offers comfort to those who feel guilty about experiencing joy in the midst of difficult circumstances. If laughter can coexist with heartache, then it is also true that genuine moments of peace or happiness can coexist with ongoing struggles. You need not feel that experiencing a moment of beauty or connection or simple pleasure somehow negates the reality of your challenges or demonstrates inappropriate priorities. The human heart is large enough to hold apparent contradictions: grief and gratitude, worry and wonder, sorrow and hope. The phrase "rejoicing may end in grief" acknowledges and even our happiest moments are touched by the awareness of their transience. The wedding celebration ends, the vacation concludes, the children grow up and move away. The health that seems so robust proves more fragile than we imagined. But rather than suggesting that we should avoid joy because it will not last forever, this verse invites us to hold both joy and sorrow as natural parts of the human experience, neither one negating the other, but both contributing to the fullness of a life lived with open hearts in a broken but beautiful world. There is actually deep comfort in this acknowledgement of life's complexity, because it means that your struggles do not disqualify you from wisdom. Your questions do not evidence lack of faith, and your emotional ups and downs do not indicate spiritual immaturity. The wisest people throughout history have been those who learned to embrace the full spectrum of human experience, without requiring every moment to fit into neat categories of good or bad, happy or sad, faithful or faithless. Think of a symphony that moves through different movements, sometimes soaring with triumphant melodies and sometimes descending into minor keys that evoke longing or loss. The beauty of the symphony lies not in any single movement, but in the way the various themes weave together to create something more complex and moving than could be achieved by happy melodies alone. Your life, with its seasons of laughter and its seasons of tears, its moments of clear vision and its periods of confusion, is more like this symphony than like a simple song that maintains the same mood and tempo throughout. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, give yourself permission to feel whatever emotions arise without judgment or the pressure to make them more consistent or socially acceptable. If grief and gratitude mingle in your heart, let them coexist. If worry about tomorrow exists alongside peace about God's faithfulness, acknowledge both without requiring yourself to resolve the tension immediately. The wisdom of Proverbs suggests that such emotional complexity is not evidence of confusion, but evidence of depth. Not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be embraced with compassion for yourself and trust in the one who understands the intricacies of every human heart. As the night deepens around you and your body finds its natural rhythm of rest, consider that the God who created you with such capacity for complex emotion is not disturbed by your inner contradictions or puzzled by your seemingly inconsistent responses to life's circumstances. He knows that hearts can ache even in laughter, and that rejoicing can be tinged with awareness of grief. He does not love you less when your emotions are complicated or confusing, nor does he expect you to maintain artificial spiritual highs that ignore the legitimate sorrows and concerns that are part of living faithfully in a fallen world. The 16th chapter of Proverbs offers us this gentle wisdom. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans. The Hebrew word translated as commit carries the idea of rolling something over, as if taking a heavy burden from your shoulders and rolling it on to someone else who is better equipped to carry it. This is not passive resignation, but active and trusting, not giving up responsibility, but acknowledging that ultimate outcomes rest in hands more capable than our own. Imagine a medieval castle built on a high cliff overlooking a strategic valley. The castle's inhabitants could see enemies approaching from miles away, but they were completely dependent on the wisdom and strength of their king for protection and provision. In times of siege, they brought all their concerns to him, trusting in his ability to devise strategies they could not imagine, into martial resources they did not know existed. Their commitment to their king was not merely emotional loyalty, but practical dependence based on proven competence and unwavering care for their welfare. This is the kind of commitment that Proverbs invites us to make regarding our plans and concerns. We continue to work diligently, plan thoughtfully, and act responsibly, but we do so as inhabitants of a kingdom ruled by one whose wisdom and power far exceed our own. We bring our projects and dreams and worries to him, not because we are incompetent or lazy, but because we recognize that the best human planning requires divine blessing to achieve its intended purposes. The promise that he will establish your plans does not mean that every goal you set will be achieved exactly as you envision it. But it does mean that as you maintain an attitude of commitment to His Lordship over every area of your life, your efforts will contribute to purposes larger and more meaningful than you could accomplish through independent striving. Sometimes He establishes your plans by providing resources and opportunities that enable you to achieve exactly what you hoped. Sometimes He establishes them by redirecting your energy toward goals that better align with His purposes for your life. And sometimes He establishes them by allowing apparent failures that become foundations for unexpected victories. The word establish appears repeatedly in Proverbs in connection with divine activity, suggesting that one of God's primary ways of working in human lives is to provide stability and sure foundation where we might otherwise experience chaos or meaningless activity. When the Lord establishes your plans, He is not merely allowing you to pursue whatever goals appeal to you at the moment, but is actively working to ensure that your efforts contribute to the kind of flourishing that reflects His character and advances His kingdom. Consider how this truth might change your approach to the decisions and projects that currently occupy your mind. If you truly believed that committing your ways to the Lord would result in His establishing your plans, how would that affect the level of anxiety you carry about outcomes? How would it change the amount of energy you spend trying to control circumstances beyond your influence? How would it impact your ability to rest peacefully at night, knowing that the success of your endeavors does not depend entirely on your ability to anticipate and manage every variable? The act of committing your plans to the Lord is not a one-time event, but an ongoing posture of the heart. It begins each morning as you offer the day's activities to Him, continues throughout the day as you seek His wisdom in small decisions and large ones, and concludes each evening as you entrust the outcomes of your efforts to His sovereign care. This rhythm of commitment creates a framework within which anxiety naturally decreases and peace naturally increases, not because circumstances become easier, but because the burden of ultimate responsibility shifts from your shoulders to His. Tonight, as you feel your body relaxing into the comfort of your bed and your mind beginning to release its grip on the day's concerns, practice this act of commitment. Picture yourself rolling the weight of your current worries and plans from your shoulders onto His, like removing a heavy backpack at the end of a long hike and setting it down beside a comfortable chair where you can finally rest. The backpack is still there if you need to pick it up again tomorrow, but for now, it rests beside the path while you rest in the assurance that someone infinitely more capable is watching over both you and your concerns. From the 27th chapter of Proverbs comes this practical wisdom. Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. This verse addresses directly one of the primary sources of anxiety that keeps people awake at night, the tendency to project our fears and hopes into an unknowable future and then react emotionally as if those projections were certain realities. The wisdom here is not to avoid planning for the future, but to avoid the kind of confidence or anxiety about future outcomes that assumes we can predict and control what lies ahead. The instruction not to boast about tomorrow can be understood in several ways. On one level, it warns against the kind of arrogant presumption that assumes our plans will automatically succeed, or that we can guarantee specific outcomes through our own efforts. On another level, it addresses the subtler tendency to find security in detailed scenarios we construct about how future events will unfold. Even our worries about tomorrow can become a form of boasting, a claim to knowledge we do not actually possess about what challenges we will face or how we will handle them. The simple truth that we do not know what a day may bring is simultaneously humbling and liberating. It is humbling because it reminds us of the limits of human foresight and control, puncturing the illusion that enough planning and preparation can eliminate uncertainty from our lives. But it is also profoundly liberating because it frees us from the impossible burden of trying to live tomorrow's challenges today, of carrying emotional responses to events that may never actually occur. Think about how much mental and emotional energy you have spent over the years worrying about things that never happened, preparing for conversations that never took place, or dreading circumstances that never materialized. This is not to suggest that all concern about the future is wasteful or faithless, but rather to recognize that there is a crucial difference between reasonable preparation and anxious projection. Reasonable preparation involves taking concrete steps to address likely challenges while maintaining emotional equilibrium about uncertain outcomes. Anxious projection involves experiencing stress responses to imaginary scenarios as if they were present realities. The phrase, "you do not know what a day may bring," can actually be a source of hope as well as humility. If we cannot predict the challenges that tomorrow may bring, neither can we predict the provisions, opportunities, victories, or joys that may await us. The same uncertainty that makes worry seem reasonable also makes excessive confidence or despair equally unrealistic. Tomorrow may indeed bring the difficulties you fear, but it may also bring solutions you have not imagined, strength you did not know you possessed, or circumstances so much better than your current situation that your present concerns will seem trivial in retrospect. This is why the discipline of staying present to today's realities, while planning wisely for tomorrow's possibilities, is so central to spiritual and emotional health. When Jesus taught his followers not to worry about tomorrow, because today's troubles are sufficient for today, he was not encouraging laziness or irresponsibility, but rather pointing toward this same wisdom that appears throughout Proverbs. Focus your emotional energy on what you can actually influence in the present moment, rather than dispersing it across hypothetical futures that may never come to pass. The practical application of this wisdom involves learning to distinguish between productive planning and unproductive worry. Productive planning might involve researching options for an upcoming decision, setting aside money for likely expenses, developing skills that will serve you well in various circumstances, or having honest conversations about important matters. These activities have concrete outcomes and can be completed within reasonable time frames. Unproductive worry, by contrast, involves endless mental rehearsal of worst-case scenarios, repeated checking and rechecking of decisions already made, or allowing fear of possible negative outcomes to prevent you from taking reasonable risks or making necessary changes. As you lie here in the peaceful darkness, notice what happens in your body and mind when you truly accept the reality that you do not know what tomorrow may bring. Does this uncertainty feel primarily threatening or liberating? For many people, the initial response is anxiety, because uncertainty feels dangerous to our instinct for self-preservation. But as you breathe deeply and allow this truth to settle into deeper places of your being, you may discover that uncertainty is also the space where hope lives, where miracles become possible, where divine intervention can surprise us with grace we could not have planned or earned. The God who holds tomorrow in his hands sees what you cannot see, knows what you do not know, and is already preparing what you will need for challenges and opportunities that have not yet appeared on your horizon. This does not mean that tomorrow will be easy or that all your concerns will prove groundless, but it does mean that you need not carry the full weight of an unknown future on your shoulders tonight. Tomorrow's grace will come with tomorrow's dawn, and today's grace has been sufficient to bring you safely to this moment of rest. In the silence that surrounds you now, as your breathing deepens and your muscles release their accumulated tension, practice the art of releasing your grip on tomorrow. See yourself opening your hands and letting go of the need to know, the need to control, the need to figure everything out before you can rest. Tomorrow remains in the hands that formed the stars and numbered every hair on your head, hands that are infinitely more capable than yours of managing whatever may come. The 29th chapter of Proverbs presents us with this timeless observation. Anxiety weighs down the heart, but a kind word cheers it up. This verse acknowledges something that anyone who has struggled with worry understands intuitively. Anxiety is not merely an emotional or mental experience, but a physical one that affects the entire being. The Hebrew word translated as weighs down suggests being pressed or bent under a burden, capturing perfectly the way persistent worry can make us feel as if we are carrying invisible weight that exhausts our energy and dims our joy. The image of anxiety weighing down the heart speaks to the way worry affects not just our thinking, but our very core, the place where our deepest emotions and motivations reside. When anxiety takes up residence in our hearts, it colors every other experience, making even pleasant moments feel somehow heavy or incomplete. Joy becomes harder to access. Gratitude requires more effort, and hope seems like a luxury we cannot afford, while pressing concerns demand our attention. But the verse does not stop with this acknowledgement of anxiety's burden. It offers hope in the form of a simple remedy. A kind word cheers it up. The Hebrew word translated as cheers carries the idea of making glad or causing to rejoice, suggesting that the right word spoken at the right time has the power not just to distract from worry, but to actively counteract its effects. This is not mere positive thinking or superficial encouragement, but the profound human reality that we are created for connection, and that authentic words of love, understanding, or hope can literally lift burdens from our hearts. Think about a time when someone spoke words to you that seemed to cut through confusion or despair and instantly lighten your emotional load. Perhaps it was a friend who listened to your concerns without trying to fix them and then simply said, "You are not alone in this." Maybe it was a mentor who saw potential in you that you could not see in yourself and spoke it into existence with words of confidence and encouragement. Or perhaps it was even a stranger who offered a genuine compliment or expression of kindness that reminded you of your worth and dignity at a moment when you had forgotten both. These experiences point to a deeper truth about how human beings are designed to function. We are not meant to carry heavy burdens in isolation, and our hearts are not equipped to bear the full weight of life's anxieties without the support that comes through authentic community. The kind word that cheers the heart is often effective, not because it provides new information or solves practical problems, but because it reminds us that we are seen, known, valued, and not forgotten in our struggles. But what if you find yourself alone tonight, without access to the kind of human connection that might speak refreshing words into your anxious heart? The wisdom of Proverbs, embedded within the larger context of Scripture, points us toward the ultimate source of the kind words our souls need most desperately. Throughout the pages of God's Word are countless expressions of His heart toward those who struggle with worry and fear. Words that carry the power to lift burdens and restore joy to hearts that have been weighed down by anxiety. Consider how these divine words of kindness might speak to your current concerns. Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. Here is acknowledgement that your worries matter to the One who rules the universe, that your concerns are not too small or too numerous or too complicated for His attention and care. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. These words offer not just comfort, but actual peace, not as a temporary distraction from reality, but as a supernatural resource for facing reality with courage and confidence. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. This invitation addresses directly the experience of feeling weighed down by anxiety, offering not just sympathy, but actual relief, not just understanding, but transformation. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. This promise does not deny the reality of difficult circumstances, but places them within a framework of ultimate meaning and hope that can sustain the heart even when immediate solutions are not visible. As you rest here in the quiet darkness, allow these kind words to settle into the places where anxiety has made its home. You need not strive to feel immediately different or to force yourself into a state of artificial peace, but simply receive these words as gifts offered to your weary heart. Let them repeat softly in your mind like a gentle refrain. He cares for you. Do not be afraid. I will give you rest. All things work together for good. These are not empty platitudes, but expressions of divine character, promises anchored in the unchanging nature of the one who speaks them. The kind word that cheers the anxious heart sometimes comes through human voices, but it also comes through the still, small voice of the Spirit, who speaks truth into the deepest places of our being. Tonight, as your body finds its natural rhythm of rest, and your mind begins to quiet its endless commentary, listen for these words of kindness being whispered to your soul. You are beloved. You are not alone. Your concerns are held in capable hands, and tomorrow's grace will be sufficient for tomorrow's needs. From the 3rd chapter of Proverbs comes this beautiful promise. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. These words have sustained countless souls through seasons of exhaustion and discouragement, offering hope that goes beyond temporary relief to promise actual renewal and transformation. The image of soaring on wings like eagles speaks to something deep within the human spirit that longs for freedom from the weight of earthbound concerns. Eagles do not achieve flight through frantic flapping or desperate effort, but by catching thermal currents that lift them effortlessly high above the landscape. From that elevated perspective, obstacles that seemed insurmountable from ground level appear as minor features in a vast and beautiful terrain. This is what hope in the Lord can do for hearts weighed down by anxiety. It lifts our perspective to a vantage point where current difficulties can be seen within the context of God's larger purposes and ultimate faithfulness. The promise of running without growing weary speaks to those who feel depleted by the constant effort required to manage life's demands while carrying emotional burdens that seem to increase rather than decrease over time. This is not a promise of perpetual energy for endless activity, but rather the assurance that when our hope is properly anchored, we can engage with life's challenges from a place of renewable strength rather than diminishing resources. The source of this strength is not our own determination or positive thinking, but the inexhaustible nature of the one in whom we hope. Walking without fainting addresses perhaps the most common experience of those who struggle with persistent worry or sadness. The simple exhaustion of putting one foot in front of the other day after day, when the future seems uncertain and the present feels overwhelming. This promise does not suggest that life will become easy or that all challenges will be removed, but it does assure us that the strength to continue, to take the next right step, even when we cannot see the ultimate destination, will be provided as we need it. The key to experiencing this renewal of strength lies in understanding what it means to hope in the Lord rather than in circumstances, outcomes, or our own ability to manage difficulties. Hope in the Lord is fundamentally different from wishful thinking or optimistic expectations about future events. It is a settled confidence in the character and promises of God that remains stable even when external circumstances fluctuate wildly. This kind of hope can coexist with uncertainty about specifics because it is anchored in certainties about who God is and how he relates to his people. Biblical hope is not passive waiting, but active trust that enables continued faithfulness even in the absence of visible progress toward desired outcomes. It is the kind of hope that allows a person to invest energy in meaningful work, even when the results may not be seen for years, to maintain loving relationships, even when others respond with indifference or hostility, to pursue healing and growth, even when setbacks seem to outnumber advances, and to rest peacefully at night, even when tomorrow remains shrouded in uncertainty. Tonight, as you consider the areas of your life where you feel weary from running or faint from walking, notice what happens when you consciously shift your hope from change in circumstances to confidence in God's character. This is not denial of legitimate concerns or forced optimism about challenging realities, but rather a reorientation of your foundational trust from variables you cannot control to the unchanging nature of the one who holds all variables within his sovereign care. Picture yourself as an eagle that has been trying to achieve flight through furious wing beating, exhausting yourself in efforts to rise above the difficulties that surround you. Now imagine discovering the thermal currents of divine grace that can lift you effortlessly above your current perspective. You need not abandon your concerns or pretend they do not matter, but you can allow hope in the Lord to provide the updraft that enables you to see them from a higher vantage point. From this elevated view, the challenges that seem to fill your entire horizon become part of a larger landscape that includes resources, possibilities, and purposes you could not perceive while struggling at ground level. The renewal of strength promised to those who hope in the Lord often comes not as a sudden surge of energy or dramatic change in circumstances, but as a quiet restoration of the ability to engage with life from a place of inner stability rather than constant anxiety. It is the difference between running on empty and running with a full tank, between walking while carrying a heavy burden and walking with hands free to receive whatever gifts each day might offer. As your breathing deepens and your body settles into the rhythm of approaching sleep, allow yourself to rest in this promise of renewal. You need not manufacture hope through willpower or convince yourself to feel optimistic about specific outcomes. Simply acknowledge your weariness honestly, and then entrust it to the one who specializes in restoring what has been depleted, healing what has been broken, and providing strength for whatever lies ahead. The 15th chapter of Proverbs offers this insight into the nature of emotional well-being. A happy heart makes the face cheerful, but heartache crushes the spirit. This observation acknowledges something that anyone who has experienced deep sorrow or persistent anxiety knows well. Our inner emotional state inevitably affects not only how we feel, but how we present ourselves to the world and how we experience every aspect of daily life. The connection between a happy heart and a cheerful face speaks to the way genuine joy radiates outward, affecting not only our own experience, but also the experience of those around us. This is not about forced smiles or artificial cheerfulness, but about the way authentic peace and contentment naturally express themselves in relaxed facial expressions, easier laughter, and a general lightness of being that others find attractive and encouraging. The Hebrew word translated as happy in this verse carries connotations not just of temporary pleasure, but of deep satisfaction and well-being. It is the kind of happiness that comes from alignment with divine purposes rather than from favorable circumstances. The kind of joy that can persist even during difficult seasons because it is rooted in realities that transcend immediate situations. This is why the proverb speaks of a happy heart rather than a happy situation, recognizing that true contentment is more about internal orientation than external conditions. The acknowledgement that heartache crushes the spirit validates the very real impact that emotional pain can have on every aspect of our being. The word crushes suggests not just sadness, but a kind of comprehensive defeat that affects our energy, our hope, our ability to engage meaningfully with life's opportunities and relationships. This is not a moral judgment about the adequacy of faith or the strength of character, but a realistic assessment of how human beings are designed to function. We are integrated beings in whom emotional, physical, and spiritual health are intimately connected. But embedded within this honest acknowledgement of heartache's effects is also an implicit invitation to seek the kind of heart transformation that can restore cheerfulness even in the midst of challenging circumstances. The proverb does not suggest that we can simply choose to be happy regardless of our situations, but it does imply that the condition of our hearts is not entirely determined by external factors and can be influenced by choices we make about where to focus our attention and in whom to place our trust. Consider how this truth might apply to your current emotional landscape. Perhaps you have been experiencing heartache that has indeed crushed your spirit, leaving you feeling depleted and discouraged, struggling to access the joy and enthusiasm that once came naturally. This verse does not condemn such experiences, but rather normalizes them as part of the human condition in a broken world. Heartache is not evidence of spiritual failure, but evidence of spiritual sensitivity, of a heart that cares deeply about meaningful things and grieves appropriately when those things are threatened or lost. At the same time, the reference to a happy heart making the face cheerful suggests that there are resources available for heart transformation that can gradually restore joy even to those who have experienced crushing disappointment or loss. This transformation rarely happens quickly or through mere acts of will, but often unfolds slowly through practices that reorient the heart towards sources of hope and meaning that transcend immediate circumstances. These practices might include regularly rehearsing truths about God's character and promises, deliberately cultivating gratitude for gifts that persist even in difficult seasons, investing energy in relationships and activities that align with eternal values, and creating space for the kind of rest and reflection that allows perspective to shift from immediate troubles to ultimate realities. None of these practices guarantee instant relief from heartache, but they do create conditions within which the heart can gradually be restored to the kind of deep contentment that naturally expresses itself in outward cheerfulness. Tonight, as you prepare for the kind of rest that allows both body and soul to be restored, consider what might contribute to the happiness of your heart over time. This is not about denying legitimate sorrows or forcing yourself to feel differently about real difficulties, but about identifying the sources of joy and meaning that remain available, even when other sources of satisfaction have been removed or threatened. Sometimes the path to a happy heart begins simply with acknowledging that your heart is currently wounded and needs the kind of gentle care you would offer to any injured part of your body. Just as physical healing requires both rest and appropriate treatment, emotional healing requires both the rest of releasing burdens to divine care and the treatment of exposing wounded places to the healing presence of the great physician, who specializes in binding up broken hearts and restoring crushed spirits. As you feel your facial muscles relaxing and your breathing becoming more peaceful, imagine the slow work of heart healing taking place even as you sleep. Hearts that have been made heavy by disappointment or crushed by heartache can indeed be restored to the kind of deep satisfaction that makes faces naturally cheerful. But this restoration is more often a gradual work of grace than a sudden transformation. Rest tonight in the assurance that this healing work is underway, even when you cannot yet see its effects, and that the one who created your heart for happiness is committed to its ultimate restoration. From the 24th chapter of Proverbs comes this encouraging word: though the righteous fall 7 times, they rise again, but the wicked stumble when calamity strikes. This verse speaks directly to those who lie awake at night, replaying their failures, questioning their resilience, or wondering whether they have what it takes to keep going in the face of repeated setbacks or disappointments. The image of falling 7 times and rising again acknowledges something that perfectionist tendencies and social media presentations often obscure. The normal Christian life includes failure, setback, and the need to begin again. The number 7 in Hebrew thought often represents completeness, suggesting that this verse is not speaking of a specific number of failures, but rather of the comprehensive reality that following God faithfully does not immunize us against difficulty, disappointment, or even moral failure. The key insight in this proverb lies not in the falling, but in the rising. What distinguishes the righteous from the wicked in this passage is not the absence of failure, but the presence of resilience. Not perfection of performance, but persistence in pursuing what is right despite repeated setbacks. This resilience is not primarily a matter of natural temperament or superior willpower, but of having access to resources for restoration that enable fresh starts even after devastating falls. The Hebrew word translated as rise carries connotations not just of getting back up, but of being established or made firm. This suggests that each time the righteous person rises after falling, they do so with greater stability and wisdom than before. The falling, while painful and disruptive, becomes part of a larger process of spiritual formation that produces increasing resilience and dependence on divine grace rather than self-sufficient strength. This truth speaks profoundly to those who struggle with shame about past failures or current weaknesses. Perhaps you lie awake at night, rehearsing decisions you regret, words you wish you could take back, opportunities you missed, or patterns of behavior that seem to persist despite your best intentions to change. This verse does not minimize the reality or consequences of failure, but it does place individual failures within the context of a larger trajectory that can include redemption, growth, and ultimate victory despite temporary defeats. The promise that the righteous rise again is not based on their own strength or determination, but on the character of the God who specializes in resurrection, restoration, and new beginnings. Throughout Scripture, we see this pattern repeated. Abraham's deception did not disqualify him from becoming the father of faith. David's adultery and murder did not remove him from being a man after God's own heart. Peter's denials did not prevent him from becoming a foundational leader of the early church. And Paul's persecution of Christians became the backdrop for his extraordinary apostolic ministry. This does not mean that failure is inconsequential or that sin does not matter, but it does mean that failure need not be final for those whose hearts are oriented toward righteousness. The capacity to rise again comes not from minimizing the seriousness of the fall, but from accessing grace that is greater than any failure and love that is more persistent than any pattern of weakness. Consider how this truth might change your relationship with your own imperfections and setbacks. Instead of viewing failures as evidence that you are not cut out for faithful living, or that God's patience with you must surely be exhausted, you might begin to see them as normal parts of a spiritual journey that includes both falling and rising, both weakness and strength, both dependence on grace and growth in wisdom. The contrast drawn with the wicked who stumble when calamity strikes suggests that the difference lies not in the presence or absence of difficulty, but in the resources available for responding to difficulty. Those whose hope is placed in their own strength, their circumstances, or their ability to control outcomes find themselves without foundation when external supports are removed. But those whose righteousness is rooted in relationship with God have access to strength that is renewed rather than depleted by adversity. Tonight, as you consider the areas where you feel you have fallen or failed, whether recently or repeatedly over time, allow this promise to settle into your heart. You can rise again. This rising may not happen immediately or dramatically, and it may require the kind of humility that seeks help from divine and human sources, rather than attempting to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. But the capacity for restoration, for fresh starts, for redemption of even your worst failures, is built into the very fabric of how God relates to those who seek righteousness even imperfectly. The grace that enables rising again is not earned by the quality of your falling or the speed of your recovery, but is freely given based on the character of the one who delights in restoration and specializes in bringing beauty from ashes, strength from weakness, and victory from apparent defeat. As your body finds its rhythm of rest and your mind releases its grip on the day's concerns and regrets, rest also in this promise. Tomorrow offers another opportunity to rise, to begin again, to walk in righteousness despite yesterday's failures. The 26th chapter of Proverbs provides this practical wisdom about emotional regulation. Like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control. This image would have been particularly vivid to ancient readers, who understood that a city's walls were its primary defense against enemy attack, natural disasters, and chaos that could destroy everything the inhabitants had worked to build and protect. A city with broken walls was vulnerable in every direction, unable to maintain order within its boundaries or to keep destructive forces at bay. Citizens could not rest peacefully at night because they had no assurance that morning would find their homes and families still safe. Commerce could not flourish because there was no guarantee that goods and property would be protected. Leadership could not function effectively because attention and resources had to be constantly diverted to deal with crises that proper defenses would have prevented. This is precisely the experience of a person who lacks self-control in their emotional responses, their thought patterns, their words, or their behaviors. Without the protective boundaries that come from disciplined choices about how to respond to various stimuli, such a person finds themselves constantly reacting to circumstances rather than acting from a place of centered stability. Anxiety, anger, discouragement, or compulsive behaviors can invade and disrupt their inner peace, just as surely as enemy armies could overrun an undefended city. But the metaphor of walls also suggests hope, because walls can be rebuilt, boundaries can be reestablished, and self-control can be developed through patient practice and dependence on divine grace. The person who currently lacks self-control is not doomed to permanent vulnerability, but can begin the work of reconstruction that will gradually restore their ability to maintain internal order and external effectiveness. The Hebrew word translated as self-control encompasses not just restraint from harmful actions, but the positive ability to choose responses that align with long-term values rather than immediate impulses. It is the capacity to pause between stimulus and response, to consider consequences before acting, to choose words that build up rather than tear down, and to invest energy in pursuits that contribute to genuine flourishing rather than momentary gratification. Developing this kind of self-control is particularly challenging for those who struggle with anxiety, because worry can create a sense of urgency that makes measured responses feel impossible. When we perceive threats to our security, relationships, health, or future, our nervous systems activate fight or flight responses that bypass rational consideration and push us toward immediate action. The walls of self-control can feel like luxuries we cannot afford when crisis seems to demand instant reaction. But this is precisely when the discipline of self-control becomes most valuable, not as a rigid suppression of all emotional response, but as a way of creating space for wisdom to operate even in the midst of challenging circumstances. The person who has cultivated internal boundaries can acknowledge anxiety without being controlled by it, can feel anger without being driven to destructive expression of it, can experience disappointment without being overwhelmed by it, and can face uncertainty without being paralyzed by it. This cultivation of self-control involves several interconnected practices. First is the development of self-awareness, the ability to notice your internal responses before they manifest in external actions. This might mean recognizing the physical sensations that accompany rising anxiety, the thought patterns that precede discouragement, or the triggers that tend to provoke disproportionate emotional reactions. Such awareness creates the pause between stimulus and response that makes choice possible. Second is the practice of intentional breathing and physical grounding that can interrupt the escalation of emotional reactions and create space for more measured responses. When you notice anxiety beginning to spiral or anger beginning to flare, deliberately slowing your breathing and relaxing your muscles can prevent these emotions from overwhelming your capacity for wise choice. This is not about suppressing legitimate feelings, but about maintaining enough internal stability to respond to them appropriately. Third is the cultivation of perspective that comes from regularly connecting with truths larger than immediate circumstances. When daily events are placed within the context of God's sovereignty, eternal purposes, and unfailing love, they naturally assume their proper proportions and lose their power to generate disproportionate anxiety or reaction. This perspective is not achieved once and maintained effortlessly, but must be renewed through regular practices of prayer, meditation on Scripture, and conscious remembrance of divine faithfulness. Fourth is the development of response strategies that align with your deepest values rather than your immediate emotions. This might mean choosing to speak words of encouragement when you feel critical, investing energy in solutions when you feel overwhelmed by problems, or maintaining hope when circumstances seem discouraging. These choices become easier with practice and eventually become natural responses that reflect the character you are becoming rather than requiring constant willpower to maintain. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, consider the walls of self-control in your own life. Where have they been broken through by repeated patterns of reaction that you would like to change? What kinds of circumstances tend to overwhelm your capacity for measured response? Rather than condemning yourself for areas of weakness or vulnerability, see them as construction sites where the patient work of rebuilding can begin. The rebuilding of walls happens one stone at a time, one choice at a time, one small victory at a time. You need not transform every area of weakness simultaneously or achieve perfect self-control before you can experience the benefits of stronger internal boundaries. Even small improvements in your capacity to pause before reacting, to choose responses that align with your values, or to maintain perspective during challenging moments can significantly increase your sense of internal safety and effectiveness. As you rest tonight, imagine the protective walls of self-control being quietly strengthened around the city of your inner life. See yourself developing the kind of internal stability that allows for peaceful sleep, confident decision-making, and gracious responses to whatever challenges tomorrow may bring. This strength is not something you must generate through willpower alone, but is available as a gift of grace to those who seek wisdom and depend on divine help for the patient work of character formation. From the 19th chapter of Proverbs comes this penetrating insight. Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. This verse speaks directly to the experience of lying awake at night with minds full of schemes, strategies, and backup plans for addressing the challenges and opportunities that fill our days. It acknowledges the very human tendency to try to achieve security through comprehensive planning, while also pointing toward a deeper source of peace that comes from aligning our planning with divine purposes. The phrase, "many are the plans," captures something universal about human nature. Our minds naturally generate multiple scenarios, alternative approaches, and contingency strategies for almost every situation we face. This mental activity is not inherently problematic and often reflects responsible stewardship of the gifts and opportunities entrusted to us. The ability to envision possibilities, anticipate challenges, and prepare responses is part of what distinguishes human beings from other creatures and enables us to participate meaningfully in the work of cultivation and creation. But the multiplication of plans can also become a source of anxiety when we begin to feel that our security and success depend entirely on our ability to anticipate and prepare for every possible contingency. The mind that lies awake, rehearsing endless variations of how future conversations might unfold, how potential challenges might be addressed, or how various goals might be achieved, is often a mind that has lost touch with the peace that comes from recognizing the limits of human planning and the reliability of divine provision. The promise that the Lord's purpose prevails does not invalidate human planning or suggest that our choices and efforts are meaningless, but rather places them within a larger context that can provide tremendous relief to anxious hearts. It means that while we are called to plan wisely and work diligently, the ultimate success of our endeavors does not depend entirely on the comprehensiveness of our preparation or the perfection of our execution. The Hebrew word translated as purpose carries connotations of counsel, intention, and deliberate design. It suggests that behind the apparent chaos of daily events and the uncertainty of future outcomes, there is a coherent plan being worked out by one whose wisdom far exceeds our own and whose power to implement his intentions is not limited by the variables that constrain human planning. This divine purpose is not arbitrary or capricious, but flows from perfect love and perfect knowledge of what will ultimately serve the good of creation and the glory of God. Understanding that the Lord's purpose prevails can transform our relationship with our own planning from anxious striving to collaborative participation. We continue to plan thoughtfully and work diligently, but we do so as junior partners in a cosmic enterprise, rather than as sole proprietors of small businesses that will succeed or fail based entirely on our own competence. This shift in perspective can reduce the emotional pressure that often accompanies planning while actually increasing the effectiveness of our efforts, because energy that was previously consumed by anxiety can be redirected toward creative and productive activity. Consider how this truth might affect your current approach to the decisions and challenges that occupy your mind during wakeful hours. Perhaps you have been lying awake, trying to think through every possible angle of an upcoming conversation, attempting to script your responses to various scenarios, and predict how others might react to different approaches. While some preparation for important conversations is certainly wise, the recognition that the Lord's purpose prevails can free you from the impossible burden of trying to control outcomes through perfect planning. Or perhaps you have been mentally rehearsing different strategies for addressing a financial challenge, a health concern, a relationship difficulty, or a career decision. Again, wise consideration of options and potential consequences is appropriate and responsible. But when such consideration becomes a source of anxiety rather than helpful preparation, it may be time to remember that your best laid plans are held within the larger context of divine purposes that are working toward outcomes you may not be able to envision or achieve through your own efforts. The peace that comes from truly accepting that the Lord's purpose prevails is not the peace of passivity or fatalism, but the peace of knowing that your sincere efforts to plan wisely and act faithfully are being woven into a larger tapestry of meaning and purpose. Your individual choices matter tremendously, but they matter as contributions to divine purposes, rather than as determinants of those purposes. This means you can plan with hope rather than anxiety, work with confidence rather than desperation, and rest with peace rather than the restless energy of someone who believes everything depends on their own vigilance and effort. Tonight, as you feel your mind beginning to release its grip on the various plans and scenarios that have been occupying your attention, practice entrusting those plans to the one whose purposes are being worked out through circumstances far beyond your ability to see or influence. This does not mean abandoning thoughtful planning or responsible preparation for tomorrow's challenges, but it does mean holding your plans lightly and resting in the assurance that the success of your endeavors ultimately depends on divine favor rather than human foresight. Picture your many plans as small boats that you have been frantically trying to navigate through choppy waters by your own strength and skill. Now imagine releasing the oars and raising the sails, allowing the wind of divine purpose to fill them and carry you toward destinations that may be even better than those you had planned for yourself. This surrender does not make you passive, but rather allows you to participate in movement that is powered by wisdom and love far greater than your own. As your breathing deepens and your body settles into the rhythm of rest, let go also of the need to resolve every detail of your plans before morning comes. The Lord's purposes are being worked out even as you sleep, and tomorrow will bring opportunities to participate in those purposes through fresh choices made with renewed wisdom and energy. Your part is to rest well tonight so that you can plan and act faithfully tomorrow, while trusting that the ultimate outcomes rest in hands far more capable than your own. The book of Proverbs, chapter 28, verse 13, offers this insight into the relationship between emotional health and spiritual integrity. Whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy. This verse addresses something that can be a significant source of anxiety and restlessness for many people: the weight of guilt, shame, and unresolved moral failures that create internal conflict and prevent the kind of peace that enables restorative sleep. The act of concealing sins involves more than simply not talking about wrongdoing with others. It encompasses the internal strategies we use to avoid dealing honestly with ways we have fallen short of our own values, hurt others through thoughtless or selfish actions, or violated our sense of what is right and good. This concealment might manifest as rationalization that reframes selfish behavior as necessary self-protection, minimization that reduces the significance of harmful actions, blame shifting that focuses on others' contributions to problematic situations, or simple avoidance that refuses to acknowledge wrongdoing at all. The promise that those who conceal their sins do not prosper speaks to the way hidden guilt affects every aspect of life. Unresolved moral failures create internal divisions that consume emotional energy, cloud judgment, strain relationships, and prevent the kind of authenticity that enables genuine connection with both God and other people. The person carrying hidden guilt often experiences a vague sense of restlessness or anxiety that seems disproportionate to current circumstances. not realizing that this unease stems from the exhausting work of maintaining psychological defenses against truths they are not ready to face. This internal division also affects our relationship with God, creating a sense of distance or disconnection that can make prayer feel empty, scripture reading feel irrelevant, and worship feel artificial. When we are working hard to avoid acknowledging areas where we have fallen short, we naturally become resistant to the kind of openness and vulnerability that enables intimate spiritual connection. The concealment of sin thus becomes a barrier not only to peace with ourselves, but to the deeper spiritual resources that could actually help us address whatever issues we are avoiding. But the verse does not end with this sobering diagnosis. It offers hope through the promise that the one who confesses and renounces finds mercy. The Hebrew words used here for confession and renunciation suggest not merely intellectual acknowledgement of wrongdoing, but genuine sorrow for harm caused and sincere intention to pursue different choices in the future. This is not about perfect behavior or guaranteed success in avoiding all future failures, but about the kind of honest reckoning with moral reality that opens the door to divine grace and restoration. Confession involves more than admitting that certain actions were wrong. It includes taking responsibility for the impact of those actions on others, acknowledging the character issues or motivational problems that contributed to the wrongdoing, and expressing genuine remorse for the distance that sin creates between ourselves and God. This kind of confession is often difficult because it requires setting aside the defensive strategies that helped us avoid facing painful truths about ourselves and our choices. Renunciation goes beyond confession to include concrete steps toward change. It might involve making amends to those who are hurt by our actions, removing ourselves from situations that facilitate destructive patterns, developing new habits that align with our values, seeking accountability from trusted friends or mentors, or pursuing whatever healing or growth is needed to address underlying issues that contributed to the problematic behavior. The promise of mercy for those who confess and renounce is not based on the completeness of their confession or the perfection of their efforts to change, but on the character of God, who delights in restoration and specializes in bringing healing to broken relationships and wounded hearts. This mercy is not cheap grace that ignores the real consequences of sin, but transforming grace that addresses both the guilt and the underlying issues that contributed to the failure in the first place. For those who struggle with anxiety or restlessness related to guilt or shame, this verse offers a pathway toward the kind of peace that enables genuine rest. The anxiety that comes from hidden guilt cannot be resolved through positive thinking, distraction, or even increased efforts to behave better in the future. It can only be addressed through the kind of honest acknowledgement that opens the door to divine mercy and the internal healing that comes through authentic repentance. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, consider whether there are areas of unresolved guilt or shame that may be contributing to your sense of unease or restlessness. This examination need not become a morbid focus on past failures or an exercise in self-condemnation, but rather a gentle inquiry into whether there are truths you have been avoiding that might actually bring relief if faced honestly and placed within the context of divine mercy. Perhaps there are relationships that need attention because of words spoken in anger, commitments that were made carelessly and then abandoned, responsibilities that were neglected because of self-centered priorities, or patterns of behavior that violate your own sense of what is right and good. The invitation of this proverb is not to heap additional guilt upon yourself, but to discover the freedom that comes through confession and the mercy that is available to those who are willing to acknowledge their need for grace. As you lie here in the quiet darkness, imagine the relief that comes when heavy burdens are set down after being carried for far too long. Picture yourself approaching the throne of grace with whatever failures or regrets have been weighing on your conscience, not in expectation of condemnation, but in hope of the mercy that is promised to those who confess and renounce their sins. This mercy is not merely forgiveness that removes guilt, but transforming grace that, addresses the underlying heart issues that contribute to patterns of failure. The peace that follows authentic confession and genuine repentance is not the temporary relief of having avoided consequences, but the deep rest that comes from being fully known and fully loved, from having hidden things brought into the light of divine grace, rather than remaining in the shadows where they can continue to cause anxiety and restlessness. This is the kind of peace that enables truly restorative sleep and genuine renewal of both body and spirit. Chapter 17 of Proverbs provides this beautiful insight into the nature of relationships and emotional well-being. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. These words speak to one of the deepest human needs, the need for connection with others who will remain faithful through both easy and difficult seasons of life. For those who struggle with loneliness, anxiety about relationships, or the sense that they must face life's challenges in isolation, this verse offers both comfort and a vision of the kind of community that enables human flourishing. The phrase "loves at all times" describes a quality of relationship that transcends the conditional affection that depends on favorable circumstances, mutual benefit, or even pleasant interactions. This is not the superficial friendliness that exists only when relationships are easy and uncomplicated, but the deep commitment that persists through misunderstandings, disappointments, changes in circumstances, and even seasons when one person is unable to reciprocate care in equal measure. Think about the relationships in your own life that have demonstrated this quality of persistent love. Perhaps there is someone who remained present during a season when illness, depression, financial difficulty, or family crisis made you less than ideal company. Maybe you can remember a friend who continued to reach out even when you were too overwhelmed or discouraged to maintain regular contact, or someone who forgave repeated failures and offered encouragement when you had little confidence in your own ability to change or grow. These experiences of being loved at all times provide a glimpse of divine love that remains constant regardless of our performance, mood, circumstances, or even faithfulness in return. The friend who loves at all times becomes a living parable of the way God relates to his people, not because we earn such love through our consistency or charm, but because love flows from the character of the one who loves, rather than being contingent on the worthiness of the one who is loved. The second part of the verse, "A brother is born for a time of adversity," suggests that some relationships are particularly designed to provide support during life's most challenging seasons. The Hebrew word translated as adversity encompasses not just external difficulties, but the internal anguish that accompanies loss, disappointment, confusion, or fear. A brother or sister born for adversity is someone whose presence becomes especially precious during times when we most need encouragement, practical help, or simply the comfort of not being alone in our struggles. These relationships are often forged in the crucible of shared difficulty, rather than in the ease of favorable circumstances. The colleague who stands with you during a professional crisis, the neighbor who appears with practical help during a family emergency, the fellow believer who offers patient listening during a season of spiritual darkness, or the family member who provides unwavering support during health challenges, often become treasured companions, whose value far exceeds what might have been predicted from more casual interactions. For those who lie awake at night, feeling isolated by their struggles, this verse offers hope that such relationships are not mere luxuries for the fortunate few, but are part of God's design for human life. You may not currently have access to the kind of friendships or family relationships described here, but the very existence of this proverb suggests that such connections are possible and that God's heart is toward providing them for those who need them. Sometimes the friend who loves at all times, or the brother born for adversity, appears in unexpected forms. It might be someone much older or younger than yourself, someone from a different cultural background or social circle, someone whose personality or interests seem quite different from your own, or even someone you initially found difficult or unappealing. God's provision of community often comes through relationships that we would not have chosen for ourselves, but that prove to be exactly what we need for particular seasons of growth or challenge. The challenge for those who long for such relationships is learning to be the kind of person who can both offer and receive this quality of love. Being a friend who loves at all times requires developing the capacity to remain present with others during their difficult seasons, even when their struggles trigger your own anxieties, or when their needs exceed your natural comfort level. It means learning to love not just when relationships are reciprocal and pleasant, but also when they require sacrifice, patience, and grace. Similarly, being able to receive love that persists through adversity requires the humility to acknowledge need and the vulnerability to accept help even when you cannot immediately return it. Many people who long for deeper community actually push away the very relationships they crave because they are uncomfortable with the vulnerability that genuine connection requires, or because they believe they must be able to give as much as they receive before they deserve care from others. Tonight, as you consider the relationships in your life, both give thanks for those who have demonstrated this quality of persistent love and consider how you might become more available to offer such love to others. This does not mean trying to be all things to all people or taking responsibility for solving everyone's problems, but rather asking God to show you specific ways you can be present with others during their times of need, and specific people to whom you might offer the kind of faithful friendship that provides stability during life's inevitable storms. If you currently feel isolated or lacking in the kind of relationships described in this proverb, remember that God sees this need and cares about it deeply. The same wisdom that inspired this verse also provides guidance for developing the character qualities that enable meaningful friendship and creates opportunities for connection with others who share similar values and struggles. As you rest tonight, entrust your relational needs to the one who understands that it is not good for people to be alone and who specializes in bringing together those who can encourage and support one another in their journey towards spiritual maturity and emotional health. Picture yourself surrounded not by perfect relationships, free from all conflict or challenge, but by the kind of authentic community where love persists through difficulty, where practical help is available during times of need, and where the joys and sorrows of life can be shared with others who understand both the beauty and the brokenness of human existence. This vision is not mere wishful thinking, but a glimpse of the kind of community that God intends for His people and that becomes possible as individuals learn to love with a kind of persistence and faithfulness that reflects divine character. From the 23rd chapter of Proverbs comes this vivid metaphor about the effects of alcohol and, by extension, any substance or behavior that promises relief from life's pressures, but ultimately compounds our problems. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has strife? Who has complaints? Who has needless bruises? Who has bloodshot eyes? Those who linger over wine, who go to sample bowls of mixed wine. Do not gaze at wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly. In the end, it bites like a snake and poisons like a viper. While this passage specifically addresses the dangers of excessive drinking, its wisdom applies more broadly to any strategy for coping with anxiety, sorrow, or stress that offers temporary relief but creates additional problems over time. In our contemporary context, this might include not only alcohol and other substances, but also patterns of compulsive spending, excessive eating, sexual behavior outside of committed relationships, workaholism, constant entertainment consumption, or any other activity that provides momentary escape from difficult emotions, but fails to address their underlying causes. The questions that open this passage capture the experience of someone whose life has become increasingly complicated by their attempts to find relief from internal pain through external means. Woe, sorrow, and strife multiply rather than decrease when we pursue solutions that treat symptoms rather than causes. The needless bruises and bloodshot eyes represent the physical and social consequences that accumulate when our coping strategies become part of the problem rather than part of the solution. The description of wine's initial appeal, its attractive color, its sparkle in the cup, the smoothness with which it goes down, acknowledges that harmful coping strategies often begin with genuine benefits, or at least the appearance of benefits. The person struggling with anxiety may indeed experience temporary relief from worry when their attention is absorbed by shopping, entertainment, work projects, or substance use. The problem is not that these activities provide no relief at all, but that the relief they provide is temporary and often comes at a cost that exceeds the benefit. The metaphor of a snake bite and viper's poison captures the way seemingly helpful strategies can become sources of additional suffering. The person who drinks to relieve social anxiety may find that alcohol initially makes social interactions feel easier, but over time may discover that their reputation, relationships, health, and self-respect have been damaged in ways that create far more anxiety than they originally sought to escape. Similarly, the person who uses spending, eating, or other compulsive behaviors to manage difficult emotions may find temporary relief, but also increasing financial stress, health problems, or shame that compound their original struggles. The warning not to gaze at wine when it sparkles in the cup suggests the importance of looking beyond. Immediate appeal to longer-term consequences when evaluating potential coping strategies. This requires the kind of honest self-assessment that asks not just whether a particular activity provides temporary relief, but whether it contributes to the kind of person you want to become and the kind of life you want to live over time. It means developing the capacity to distinguish between strategies that genuinely address underlying issues and those that merely provide distraction or temporary numbing. For those who struggle with anxiety, this distinction is particularly important because anxiety itself can create a sense of urgency that makes careful evaluation of coping strategies feel impossible. When worry feels overwhelming, almost any activity that provides immediate relief can seem not just appealing but necessary for survival. The anxious mind may rationalize that just this once, or just until things calm down, certain behaviors are acceptable, even when deeper wisdom recognizes them as potentially harmful. The alternative to these ultimately destructive coping strategies is not to simply eliminate all sources of comfort or pleasure, but to develop a repertoire of activities and practices that provide genuine relief without creating additional problems. These might include physical exercise that releases tension while improving health, creative pursuits that provide emotional expression while developing skills, meaningful work that engages energy while contributing to valuable purposes, or spiritual practices that address the soul's deepest needs while strengthening connection with divine resources. The process of replacing harmful coping strategies with beneficial ones often requires patience and self-compassion, particularly for those whose current strategies developed as responses to significant trauma, loss, or overwhelming life circumstances. The person who has been using alcohol, food, spending, or other behaviors to manage difficult emotions may need professional help, supportive community, and time to develop alternative ways of processing and responding to internal pain. This transition is often complicated by the fact that giving up familiar coping strategies can initially increase rather than decrease emotional discomfort. The anxiety, sadness, or stress that was being numbed or distracted through harmful behaviors may feel more intense when those behaviors are eliminated, creating a strong temptation to return to old patterns. This is why sustainable change often requires not just the elimination of problematic behaviors, but the development of positive alternatives and the cultivation of support systems that can provide encouragement during difficult periods of adjustment. Tonight, as you consider your own strategies for managing stress, worry, or emotional pain, approach this reflection with compassion rather than condemnation. If you recognize patterns in your life that provide temporary relief but create long-term problems, see this recognition as the beginning of wisdom rather than evidence of failure. The very fact that you can identify these patterns suggests that you have the self-awareness necessary to begin making different choices. Consider what genuine relief might look like, for the specific struggles you face. If anxiety is your primary challenge, what activities or practices help you feel more grounded and peaceful without creating additional problems? If loneliness drives you toward behaviors that ultimately increase your isolation, what might help you build authentic connections with others? If fear about the future leads you to seek control through harmful means, what would it look like to find security in sources that are actually reliable and beneficial? The wisdom of Proverbs suggests that these healthier alternatives exist and can be discovered by those who are willing to look beyond immediate gratification to long-term flourishing. Sometimes this requires seeking guidance from others who have successfully navigated similar challenges. Sometimes it requires experimenting with new approaches to self-care and stress management. And sometimes it requires addressing underlying spiritual or emotional issues that contribute to the need for relief in the first place. As you prepare for sleep tonight, imagine yourself developing the kind of discernment that can distinguish between what sparkles attractively in the cup and what truly nourishes and heals. Picture yourself learning to find comfort and relief in sources that contribute to your long-term well-being rather than undermining it. This transformation may not happen quickly or easily, but it is possible for those who are willing to look honestly at their current patterns and seek wisdom about healthier alternatives. The promise embedded in this warning about wine and its effects is that genuine relief from life's pressures is available, but it comes through different means than those that offer quick fixes or temporary escapes. True peace, lasting joy, and authentic comfort are found through relationship with God, community with others who share similar values, engagement with meaningful work, and the development of character qualities that enable resilience in the face of difficulty. Rest tonight in the assurance that whatever coping strategies you may need to change, whatever patterns you may need to develop, and whatever healing you may need to pursue, divine grace is available to help with the process. The God who warns against strategies that ultimately bring harm is the same God who provides resources for genuine healing and lasting transformation. Your part is to remain open to His guidance and willing to take the sometimes difficult steps toward choices that serve your true well-being, rather than merely providing temporary relief. Chapter 27 of Proverbs offers this profound insight into the nature of emotional health and spiritual vitality. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. This simple metaphor captures something essential about how human beings are designed to grow, mature, and develop the kind of character that enables them to navigate life's challenges with wisdom and grace. The image of iron sharpening iron suggests that the process of becoming who we are meant to be requires friction, contact with others who challenge us, refine us, and help us develop capacities we could not develop in isolation. Just as a knife becomes sharper through contact with another piece of metal that provides the right kind of resistance, human beings become wiser, more compassionate, more resilient, and more mature through relationships that provide appropriate challenge, honest feedback, and opportunities to practice virtues like patience, forgiveness, and selfless love. This sharpening process is often uncomfortable, particularly for those who struggle with anxiety or sensitivity to conflict. The kind of relationships that produce genuine growth may involve conversations that challenge our assumptions, friends who love us enough to point out our blind spots, family members who refuse to enable our destructive patterns, or colleagues who push us to develop skills we would prefer to avoid. The friction that makes us sharper can initially feel threatening to our sense of security or self-esteem, but the metaphor suggests that this discomfort is not evidence that something is wrong, but rather evidence that something important is happening. A blade that never experiences sharpening becomes dull and ineffective, unable to accomplish the purposes for which it was designed. Similarly, a person who avoids all challenging relationships, difficult conversations, or situations that require growth may find themselves unprepared for life's inevitable demands and unable to contribute meaningfully to others' well-being. The key insight in this proverb is that sharpening is mutual. One person sharpens another. This is not about superior individuals imposing their wisdom on inferior ones, but about the reciprocal process through which people of good faith challenge and encourage each other toward greater maturity. Even in relationships where there seems to be an obvious difference in wisdom, experience, or spiritual development, the person who serves as a mentor or guide often discovers that they too are being sharpened through the relationship. For those who feel isolated or who struggle with relationships, this verse offers both challenge and hope. The challenge is to recognize that spiritual and emotional growth rarely happens in complete isolation, that we need others who can see our blind spots, celebrate our progress, and provide accountability for areas where we tend to drift toward compromise or complacency. The hope is that such relationships are not luxuries for the socially gifted, but necessities that God is committed to providing for those who genuinely seek them. Sometimes the person who sharpens us appears in unexpected forms. It might be someone who initially seems difficult or challenging, someone whose personality or background differs significantly from our own, or even someone we find irritating until we recognize that their presence in our lives is serving purposes we had not initially appreciated. The coworker who asks probing questions that force us to think more carefully about our decisions, the family member whose different perspective challenges our assumptions, or the friend who refuses to let us wallow in self-pity, may all be instruments of divine grace designed to promote our growth. The sharpening process also requires the right spirit and approach from both parties. Iron that is too hard or too soft will not sharpen effectively, and people who are either overly defensive or completely passive will not experience the kind of mutual refinement that this proverb describes. Healthy sharpening happens when people combine humility about their need for growth with confidence in their basic worth and value, when they can receive challenging feedback without being devastated and offer honest observations without being cruel. This balance is particularly difficult for those who struggle with anxiety about relationships or who have been hurt by people who use the excuse of helping you grow to justify criticism that was actually destructive rather than constructive. Learning to distinguish between relationships that truly sharpen and those that merely wound requires wisdom, experience, and often the guidance of others who can help us evaluate whether particular interactions are contributing to our flourishing or undermining our well-being. The goal of the sharpening process is not to eliminate all rough edges or to create uniformity among people, but to help each person become the best version of themselves, fully expressing their unique gifts while developing character qualities that enable healthy relationships and effective service. Just as different tools require different kinds of sharpening depending on their intended function, different people need different kinds of challenge and support depending on their temperament, history, and calling. Tonight, as you consider the relationships in your life, think about those who have served as sharpening agents in your spiritual and emotional development. Who has loved you enough to challenge you when you are settling for less than your potential? Who has asked difficult questions that helped you clarify your values or priorities? Who has provided feedback that was initially uncomfortable but ultimately helpful in promoting your growth? Consider also how you might serve as a sharpening influence in others' lives. This does not mean becoming critical or constantly offering unsolicited advice, but rather being the kind of person whose presence encourages others toward their highest potential. Sometimes this happens through direct conversation, but often it occurs simply through modeling the kinds of character qualities you hope to see developed in yourself and others. If you currently feel that your relationships are not providing the kind of mutual sharpening described in this proverb, consider what steps you might take to cultivate deeper, more meaningful connections with others. This might involve being more vulnerable about your own struggles and growth areas, asking others about their goals and challenges, or seeking out communities where authentic spiritual development is valued and supported. As you prepare for sleep, imagine yourself being gradually shaped into the person God created you to be through the loving friction of relationships that challenge you to grow, while also providing the safety and support necessary for such growth to occur. Picture yourself both receiving and offering the kind of influence that helps others develop their gifts, overcome their weaknesses, and contribute meaningfully to the common good. The sharpening process is not always comfortable, but it is always purposeful, designed to prepare you for whatever challenges and opportunities lie ahead. Rest tonight in the assurance that the relationships God provides, even the difficult ones, are meant to serve your ultimate well-being and the well-being of those whose lives you touch. Your willingness to be shaped and to participate in shaping others is part of how divine love works through human community to accomplish purposes larger than any individual could achieve alone. From the wisdom of Proverbs chapter 28 comes this insight into the relationship between spiritual health and emotional well-being. Those who trust in themselves are fools, but those who walk in wisdom are kept safe. This verse addresses one of the fundamental sources of anxiety that plagues modern life: the belief that our security, success, and happiness depend entirely on our own knowledge, strength, and ability to manage circumstances beyond our control. The harsh word fools might initially seem overly critical, but in the wisdom literature of Scripture, foolishness is not primarily about intellectual capacity, but about the orientation of the heart towards self-sufficiency rather than dependence on divine wisdom and provision. The fool, in biblical terms, is not necessarily someone who lacks intelligence, but someone who believes that human understanding and effort are sufficient for navigating life's complexities successfully. This kind of self-trust manifests in various ways that are particularly familiar to those who struggle with anxiety. It might appear as the compulsive need to research every possible angle of a decision before feeling safe to act, the belief that enough planning and preparation can eliminate uncertainty from future outcomes, the assumption that personal happiness depends on the ability to control how others respond to us, or the conviction that security comes from accumulating enough resources, knowledge, or social connections to handle whatever challenges might arise. While responsibility, diligence, and thoughtful preparation are certainly virtues encouraged throughout Proverbs, they become problematic when they shift from faithful stewardship to anxious self-reliance. The difference lies not in the external actions, but in the internal source of confidence. Do we work and plan from a foundation of trust in divine sovereignty, or do we strive and worry from a foundation of belief that everything depends on our own competence? The person who trusts in themselves often experiences anxiety that is disproportionate to their actual circumstances, because they are carrying emotional weight that was never designed to be borne by human shoulders alone. When we believe that our well-being depends entirely on our ability to anticipate and control outcomes, every decision becomes loaded with the pressure of getting it exactly right. Every relationship becomes a project to be managed rather than a gift to be received, and every uncertainty becomes a threat to our carefully constructed sense of security. This self-trust often develops as a response to experiences of disappointment, betrayal, or inadequate support from others. The person who learned early that they could not depend on others for consistent care may naturally conclude that self-reliance is the only realistic strategy for survival. While such self-reliance may indeed provide some measure of protection and accomplishment, it also creates the exhausting burden of feeling responsible for managing everything that affects one's well-being. The alternative offered in this proverb is to walk in wisdom, which involves a fundamentally different orientation toward life's challenges and uncertainties. To walk in wisdom means to live with the recognition that human understanding is limited, that many variables affecting our lives are beyond our control, and that ultimate security comes not from perfect planning, but from relationship with the one who sees all things and works all things together for the good of those who love him. Walking in wisdom does not mean abandoning personal responsibility or failing to use the intelligence and skills God has given us. Rather, it means holding our efforts lightly, recognizing that we can plant and water, but cannot make seeds grow, that we can prepare for conversations, but cannot control how others respond, that we can save money and plan for the future, but cannot guarantee that our plans will unfold as we hope. The promise that those who walk in wisdom are kept safe does not mean that they will never face challenges, disappointments, or even tragedies. Rather, it means that they will be kept safe from the particular kind of anxiety and despair that comes from believing that their well-being depends entirely on their own abilities. They will be kept safe from the exhaustion of trying to carry burdens that are too heavy for human shoulders, safe from the despair that comes when careful plans fail to produce expected results, and safe from the isolation that results from believing that asking for help is a sign of weakness or failure. This safety is not primarily external, but internal, not primarily about avoiding difficulty, but about having access to resources for navigating difficulty with peace, hope, and resilience. The person who walks in wisdom can face uncertainty without being paralyzed by anxiety, because their confidence is anchored in realities that transcend immediate circumstances. They can acknowledge their limitations without being ashamed, because they understand that dependence on divine wisdom is a sign of spiritual maturity rather than personal inadequacy. Tonight, as you consider the areas of your life where anxiety tends to be strongest, notice whether those tend to be areas where you feel most responsible for controlling outcomes through your own understanding and effort. Perhaps you lie awake worrying about your children's futures, your financial security, your health, your relationships, or your career, because you believe that these outcomes depend primarily on your ability to make all the right choices and anticipate all possible challenges. The invitation of this proverb is not to become careless or irresponsible about important matters, but to hold your efforts within the larger context of divine sovereignty and care. Continue to love your children well, but recognize that their ultimate well-being depends on grace beyond what you can provide. Continue to work diligently and save wisely, but acknowledge that your security comes from divine provision rather than personal accumulation. Continue to pursue health and nurture relationships, but rest in the knowledge that many factors affecting these areas of life are beyond your control and in the hands of one who cares for you more deeply than you care for yourself. As you feel your body relaxing into the comfort of your bed and your breathing deepening into the rhythm of approaching sleep, practice releasing your grip on the need to figure everything out through your own wisdom. Picture yourself as a traveler who has been trying to navigate a complex route using an inadequate map and a dim flashlight, now discovering that a reliable guide is available who knows the territory intimately and is committed to leading you safely to your destination. This transition from self-trust to walking in wisdom is not a one-time decision, but a daily, even moment-by-moment choice to remember that you are not alone in facing life's challenges, and that your efforts, while important, are held within the context of divine purposes that are working toward outcomes more wonderful than you could plan for yourself. Rest tonight in the safety that comes not from having everything figured out, but from walking in wisdom that acknowledges human limitations while trusting in divine faithfulness. The 30th chapter of Proverbs contains this beautiful prayer that speaks directly to those who struggle with anxiety about provision and security. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, "Who is the Lord?" Or I may become poor and steal, and so dishonor the name of my God. This prayer reflects a wisdom that recognizes both the dangers of scarcity and the dangers of abundance, seeking instead the kind of sufficiency that enables faithful living without the temptations that come from either extreme. The request for neither poverty nor riches might initially seem strange to those who assume that more resources always provide greater security and peace of mind. But the writer of this prayer understood something that contemporary research confirms. Happiness and peace are not directly correlated with wealth beyond the point where basic needs are met. In fact, significant wealth often creates new forms of anxiety related to managing resources, protecting against loss, making wise investment decisions, and navigating the complex social dynamics that surround financial advantage. The phrase daily bread echoes the prayer that Jesus taught his disciples, suggesting that there is wisdom in focusing on immediate needs, rather than attempting to secure ourselves against all possible future want. This is not about becoming careless with money or failing to plan for reasonable future expenses. but about recognizing that true security comes from daily dependence on divine provision, rather than from accumulating enough resources to feel independent of such dependence. The concern about having too much and disowning God speaks to the way abundance can gradually erode our sense of need for divine grace and guidance. When life is comfortable and resources are plentiful, it becomes easy to forget that every good gift comes from divine generosity, and to begin attributing success to personal cleverness, hard work, or good fortune. This spiritual amnesia often leads to a practical atheism that acknowledges God in theory while living as if he were irrelevant to daily decisions and priorities. Conversely, the fear of becoming poor and being tempted to steal acknowledges that extreme scarcity can create pressures that make faithful living more difficult. While poverty is not inherently sinful, and many people have maintained integrity despite facing severe financial hardship, the stress of not being able to meet basic needs can create temptations toward desperation, bitterness, or choices that compromise moral values. The request for daily bread suggests a middle way that provides sufficiency without excess, enough to meet legitimate needs without the surplus that can become a source of false security, or the scarcity that can drive desperate choices. This sufficiency looks different for different people in different circumstances, but it generally includes having enough food, shelter, clothing, and resources to live with dignity, while also having opportunities to share with others who have less. For those who lie awake at night worrying about money, this prayer offers a framework for thinking about financial concerns that can reduce anxiety while promoting both spiritual health and practical wisdom. Instead of striving for enough wealth to feel completely secure or panicking about the possibility of not having enough to meet future needs, we can focus on seeking the kind of sufficiency that enables faithful living in the present moment. This orientation toward enough rather than more can be profoundly liberating for those whose anxiety is driven by financial concerns. It shifts the focus from accumulation to stewardship, from independence to dependence on divine provision, and from future security to present faithfulness. It also provides a framework for making financial decisions that considers not only practical factors, but also spiritual implications. The prayer recognizes that both wealth and poverty can be spiritually dangerous, but for different reasons. Wealth can lead to pride, false security, and forgetfulness of divine dependence, while poverty can lead to desperation, bitterness, and choices driven by survival rather than faithfulness. The request for daily bread seeks to avoid both dangers by asking for the kind of provision that enables spiritual flourishing alongside material sufficiency. This middle way requires wisdom to recognize what constitutes genuine need versus culturally conditioned desires for status, comfort, or security beyond what is actually necessary for well-being. It means learning to distinguish between reasonable preparation for future needs and anxious accumulation driven by fear of not having enough. It also means developing the contentment that can appreciate present provisions without constantly striving for more. Tonight, as you consider your own relationship with money and material provision, think about how this prayer might shape your approach to financial planning, spending decisions, and concerns about future security. Perhaps you have been lying awake, worrying about whether you will have enough resources to handle unexpected expenses, maintain your current lifestyle during retirement, or provide for your family's needs. These concerns are not necessarily evidence of lack of faith, but they become problematic when they shift from reasonable planning to anxious striving, or when they create the illusion that financial security can provide the kind of ultimate safety that only divine providence can offer. Consider what daily bread might look like in your current circumstances. What are your genuine needs versus your culturally influenced wants? What level of financial resources would enable you to live with dignity and generosity without falling into either the pride that comes from abundance or the desperation that comes from scarcity? How might your financial decisions change if they were guided by the desire for sufficiency rather than the pursuit of wealth or the fear of poverty? As you prepare for sleep, Practice entrusting your financial concerns to the one who knows your needs before you ask and who has promised to provide what is necessary for those who seek first his kingdom and righteousness. This does not mean abandoning financial responsibility or wise planning, but it does mean holding your financial life within the larger context of divine care and provision. Picture yourself receiving each day's provision as a gift rather than something you must secure through your own efforts alone. Imagine the peace that comes from having enough for today's needs while trusting that tomorrow's provision will come from the same source that has sustained you thus far. This trust does not eliminate the need for work, saving, or planning, but it does eliminate the anxiety that comes from believing that your security depends entirely on your ability to accumulate and protect resources. Rest tonight in the assurance that the God who feeds the birds of the air and clothes the lily of the field is aware of your needs and committed to providing what is necessary for your flourishing. Your part is to work faithfully, spend wisely, and give generously, while trusting that true security comes not from the size of your bank account, but from the character of the one who holds your life in his hands and has promised never to leave or forsake those who put their trust in him. As we journey deeper into the night and allow these timeless wisdoms to wash over our hearts like gentle waves upon a peaceful shore, let us turn our attention to one of the most beloved collections of verses in all of Scripture, the Psalms. These ancient songs and prayers have provided comfort, hope, and strength to countless souls who have faced the darkness of uncertainty, the weight of sorrow, and the burden of anxiety that can make rest seem impossible. The book of Psalms is unique among the wisdom literature of Scripture because it captures the full range of human emotion and experience in the context of relationship with God. Here we find not sanitized spiritual platitudes, but honest cries from the heart, raw expressions of fear and doubt, alongside soaring declarations of faith and trust. The psalmists understood that authentic spirituality must have room for questions, complaints, fears, and struggles alongside praise, thanksgiving, and confident hope. Tonight, as we prepare to explore some of these treasures, imagine yourself joining a chorus of voices that stretches across centuries and cultures, all finding in these ancient words expressions of their deepest longings and most profound hopes. You are not alone in your struggles with worry, sadness, or fear. The very existence of these psalms testifies to the universality of such experiences and to the availability of divine comfort for all who seek it. Psalm 23 begins with words that have comforted more anxious hearts than perhaps any other passage in all of literature. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. These simple words contain depths of meaning that only reveal themselves to those who have experienced the kind of care and provision that comes from placing oneself trustingly in the hands of a faithful guide and protector. The image of God as a shepherd speaks to something deep within the human soul that longs for the kind of comprehensive care that attends to every need. A good shepherd does not merely point sheep in the general direction of pasture and water, but leads them step by step to the best grazing areas, protects them from predators, tends their wounds, searches for them when they wander, and provides the kind of constant presence that enables rest even in potentially dangerous environments. When the psalmist declares, I lack nothing, this is not a claim that life is without challenge or difficulty, but rather a testimony that divine provision is sufficient for whatever circumstances arise. This sufficiency is not measured by external abundance, but by the adequacy of divine grace for each day's needs and challenges. The person who can say, I lack nothing, has learned to distinguish between genuine needs and endless wants, between necessities and desires shaped by comparison with others, or cultural expectations about what constitutes adequate provision. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. These images speak to the way divine care addresses not only practical needs for sustenance and security, but also deeper needs for rest, beauty, and spiritual renewal. The green pastures represent not just adequate nutrition, but abundant provision, not mere survival, but flourishing. The quiet waters suggest not just hydration, but the kind of peace that comes from being led to sources of refreshment, rather than having to search frantically for them in times of desperation. The phrase, "He refreshes my soul," acknowledges that human beings need more than physical provision to experience genuine well-being. The soul requires renewal that comes through beauty, rest, meaningful relationships, and connection with purposes larger than immediate survival or personal satisfaction. This refreshment often comes not through dramatic interventions, but through daily gifts of grace, a moment of unexpected beauty, a word of encouragement from a friend, a sense of divine presence during prayer, or simply the peace that comes from knowing that we are seen, known, and cared for by the one who created us. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. This guidance is not always about avoiding difficulty, but about walking through whatever circumstances arise in ways that reflect divine character and serve divine purposes. The right paths are not necessarily the easiest paths or the most comfortable ones, but they are the paths that lead to the fullest expression of who we were created to be, and the greatest contribution we can make to divine purposes in the world. The phrase, "for his name's sake," reminds us that divine guidance serves purposes larger than our immediate comfort or convenience. God's reputation is connected to how he cares for his people, and his character is revealed through the way he leads those who trust him through both easy and difficult seasons. This means that even when we cannot understand why particular paths are necessary or where they are leading, we can trust that they serve good purposes because they flow from the character of one who is perfectly good and perfectly wise. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. This verse acknowledges that divine care does not eliminate the reality of dark valleys, but provides resources for walking through them without being overwhelmed by fear. The darkest valleys of life, seasons of loss, illness, betrayal, financial crisis, or spiritual confusion, are not avoided by those who trust in divine shepherding, but they are navigated with hope because of the assurance of divine presence. The rod and staff represent the tools that shepherds use to guide and protect their flocks. The rod is used to fend off predators, while the staff is used to gently guide sheep back to the flock when they wander. Both tools represent divine care that is both protective and corrective, both powerful enough to handle serious threats and gentle enough to provide guidance without causing harm. This combination of strength and tenderness characterizes the kind of care that enables genuine security even in uncertain circumstances. Tonight, as you rest in the imagery of this beloved psalm, allow yourself to experience the kind of safety that comes from being known and cared for by one whose capacity for provision far exceeds your ability to anticipate or secure what you need. You need not solve all your problems before you can rest, nor must you eliminate all uncertainty before you can experience peace. The shepherd who watches over you sees what you cannot see, knows what you do not know, and has resources available that you have not yet imagined. Picture yourself as a sheep that has been anxiously searching for food and water, constantly alert to potential dangers, exhausted by the effort required to meet basic needs through constant vigilance and effort. Now imagine discovering that a shepherd has been watching over you all along, one who knows where the best pastures are located, where the safest water can be found, and how to provide protection from threats you could not have handled on your own. This is not a picture of passivity, but of the kind of trust that enables appropriate rest and restorative peace. The sheep still needs to eat the grass and drink the water, still needs to follow the shepherd's guidance and respond to his direction, but the burden of locating resources and ensuring safety shifts from sheep to shepherd. Similarly, you still need to make responsible choices, work diligently, and respond faithfully to divine guidance. But the ultimate responsibility for outcomes shifts from your shoulders to his. As your breathing deepens and your body settles into the rhythm of approaching sleep, repeat these words softly to yourself. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. Let them sink into places where anxiety has taken up residence, where fear has made itself at home, where worry has convinced you that everything depends on your own ability to provide and protect. You are not alone in facing tomorrow's challenges, and you need not carry the full weight of your concerns through another sleepless night. Psalm 46 offers another anchor for anxious souls. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way, and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, and the mountains quake with their surging. These verses acknowledge that life can indeed feel like earthquakes that shake our foundations, like mountains falling into the sea, like roaring waters that threaten to overwhelm everything we thought was stable and secure. But the response to such chaos is not denial of its reality or forced optimism about outcomes, but rather confidence in the availability of divine refuge and strength that remains constant, regardless of external circumstances. The word refuge suggests a place of safety that provides protection from storms, a shelter that remains secure even when everything else is being shaken. This refuge is not a physical location, but a spiritual reality that becomes accessible through faith, a sanctuary of the heart that can be entered even in the midst of external chaos. To find refuge in God means to rest in His character, His promises, and His commitment to ultimate good, even when immediate circumstances seem threatening or confusing. The promise of divine strength speaks to the human experience of feeling inadequate for the challenges we face, overwhelmed by demands that exceed our natural capacities, or depleted by prolonged struggle with difficulties that seem to have no clear resolution. This strength is not a temporary boost of energy, but an ongoing source of resilience that enables continued faithfulness even when our own resources feel exhausted. The phrase ever-present help addresses one of the deepest fears that can keep us awake at night, the fear that we will face our worst challenges alone, that help will not be available when we need it most, or that we will be abandoned in our most vulnerable moments. This promise does not guarantee that human help will always be available or that circumstances will always resolve quickly, but it does assure us that divine presence and assistance are constants we can count on regardless of how isolated or overwhelmed we might feel. The declaration, "Therefore we will not fear," is not a denial of natural human responses to threatening circumstances, but a choice to interpret those circumstances within the larger context of divine faithfulness. Fear is a natural response to uncertainty and potential danger, but it need not be the controlling response when we have access to sources of security that transcend immediate situations. The imagery of earth giving way and mountains falling into the sea represents the most fundamental threats to human security, the collapse of systems we thought were stable, the loss of relationships we believed were permanent, the failure of institutions we trusted to provide protection, or the disappearance of resources we counted on for our well-being. But even these catastrophic scenarios cannot shake the foundation of divine character and commitment to those who place their trust in Him. Tonight, as you consider what feels most threatening or unstable in your current circumstances, notice what happens when you place those concerns within the context of divine refuge and strength. Your job situation may indeed be uncertain, your health may be fragile, your relationships may be strained, or your financial resources may be inadequate for future needs. These are legitimate concerns that deserve attention and appropriate action, but they need not become sources of overwhelming anxiety when they are held within the larger reality of divine care and provision. The refuge that God provides is not an escape from responsibility or a magical solution to all problems, but rather the kind of security that enables courageous engagement with difficulty rather than anxious avoidance of it. When we know that our ultimate safety does not depend on our ability to control outcomes, we can face challenges with greater wisdom and effectiveness than when we approach them from a foundation of fear. As you feel your body relaxing into rest and your mind beginning to quiet its endless commentary on potential problems and their possible solutions, practice entering the refuge that is always available regardless of external circumstances. Picture yourself as someone who has been caught in a severe storm, frantically searching for shelter, now discovering a house built on solid foundation with walls thick enough to withstand whatever winds may blow. This refuge is not temporary accommodation until the storm passes, but a permanent dwelling place that provides safety through all of life's changing seasons. You can return to this place of refuge whenever anxiety threatens to overwhelm, whenever circumstances feel chaotic, or whenever you need the kind of peace that enables wise response rather than fearful reaction. Rest tonight in the assurance that whatever may feel unstable or threatening in your life right now, you have access to strength that does not depend on your own capacity, help that is always present, even when you cannot sense it, and refuge that cannot be shaken by any earthly circumstance. Your security is anchored not in the stability of your external situation, but in the unchanging character of the one who has promised to be your refuge and strength through every season of life. From Psalm 55 comes this honest expression of overwhelm that speaks directly to those whose anxiety feels too heavy to bear. My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen on me. Fear and trembling have beset me. Horror has overwhelmed me. I said, "Oh, that I had the wings of a dove. I would fly away and be at rest. I would flee far away and stay in the desert. I would hurry to my place of shelter, far from the tempest and storm." These words validate the experience of those who feel overwhelmed by anxiety, to the point where escape seems like the only viable option. The psalmist does not spiritualize his distress or pretend that proper faith eliminates the experience of being besieged by fear and trembling. Instead, he acknowledges the reality of emotional overwhelm while ultimately placing it within the context of divine faithfulness and care. The image of wanting wings to fly away resonates deeply with anyone who has felt trapped by circumstances beyond their control, suffocated by responsibilities that seem too heavy to bear, or exhausted by prolonged struggle with problems that have no easy solutions. The desire to flee to a desert place of shelter speaks to the longing for simplicity, peace, and distance from the complex demands of daily life that can create chronic stress and anxiety. But the psalm does not end with this expression of the desire to escape. Instead, it moves toward a declaration of trust that acknowledges divine faithfulness even in the midst of overwhelming circumstances. Cast your cares on the Lord, and He will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken. This progression from honest acknowledgement of distress to active entrusting of cares to divine care provides a model for how to process overwhelming anxiety without being consumed by it. The instruction to cast your cares suggests an active process of deliberately transferring the weight of our concerns from our own shoulders to divine care. The Hebrew word translated as cast carries the idea of hurling or throwing, suggesting that this is not a gentle placing, but a forceful release of burdens that have become too heavy to carry. This casting is not a one-time action, but an ongoing practice that may need to be repeated multiple times as anxiety attempts to reclaim its hold on our thoughts and emotions. The promise that He will sustain you speaks to divine provision not just of external needs, but of internal strength and resilience. To be sustained means to be upheld, supported, and provided with what is necessary to continue moving forward even when circumstances remain difficult. This sustaining grace often comes not through dramatic interventions, but through daily provisions of strength, wisdom, hope, and peace that enable continued faithfulness despite ongoing challenges. The assurance that the righteous will not be shaken does not mean that they will never face difficulty or even tragedy, but rather that their fundamental security does not depend on external circumstances remaining stable. The unshakable foundation is not perfect health, financial security, harmonious relationships, or favorable circumstances, but rather the character and promises of God that remain constant regardless of how dramatically life situations may change. Tonight, if you find yourself identifying with the psalmist's description of overwhelming anxiety, take comfort in knowing that such feelings are part of the human experience. acknowledged and addressed in Scripture, rather than evidence of spiritual failure or inadequate faith. The God who inspired these words understands the weight of human anxiety and provides both permission to feel overwhelmed and resources for finding stability, even in the midst of emotional storms. The practice of casting your cares involves more than merely thinking about your problems differently or trying to convince yourself not to worry. It requires a deliberate act of will that acknowledges both the reality of legitimate concerns and the reality of divine capacity to handle what exceeds your own ability to manage or control. This casting can be done through prayer that specifically names your concerns and entrusts them to divine care, through physical gestures that symbolize release, such as opening your hands or writing down worries and then destroying the paper, or through meditation that visualizes transferring heavy burdens to shoulders, infinitely more capable of carrying them. As you lie here in the peaceful darkness, practice this ancient discipline of casting your cares. Identify the specific concerns that have been weighing most heavily on your mind and heart. Rather than trying to solve them or even fully understand them, simply acknowledge them honestly and then make a conscious choice to entrust them to the One who has promised to sustain those who place their trust in Him. Picture yourself as someone who has been carrying an increasingly heavy pack during a long and difficult journey, muscles aching from the strain, breath becoming labored from the effort required to continue moving forward. Now imagine meeting a fellow traveler whose strength far exceeds your own, and who offers not just to help carry your pack, but to take it entirely upon his own shoulders. The relief of releasing this weight allows your shoulders to relax, your breathing to deepen, and your steps to become lighter and more confident. This is the relief that comes through genuinely casting your cares, rather than merely talking about them or thinking about them differently. It is the peace that passes understanding, because it does not depend on understanding how your problems will be solved, but rather on trusting the character of the One who has taken responsibility for carrying what you cannot bear alone. From Psalm 62 comes this declaration of confidence in divine timing and provision. Yes, my soul, find rest in God. My hope comes from Him. Truly, He is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will not be shaken. My salvation and my honor depend on God. He is my mighty rock, my refuge. The repetition in this psalm of words like rock, fortress, and refuge emphasizes the stability and security that come from anchoring hope in divine character, rather than in circumstances that can change unpredictably. These metaphors speak to the human need for something solid to stand on, something reliable to depend on, and something strong enough to provide protection when life feels chaotic or threatening. The image of God as a rock suggests the kind of unchanging foundation that can support the full weight of human hope and trust without shifting or cracking under pressure. Unlike human sources of security that may prove unreliable when tested by crisis, this foundation remains solid regardless of how much weight is placed upon it or how severe the storms that beat against it. The fortress metaphor speaks to the comprehensive protection available to those who take refuge in divine care. A well-built fortress provides safety not just from direct attack, but from siege conditions that might attempt to wear down resistance over time. This protection is not merely defensive, but also provides a secure base from which to engage with external challenges from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. The instruction to find rest in God speaks directly to hearts that have become weary from carrying anxiety, fear, or sorrow. This rest is not mere physical relaxation, but the deep peace that comes from transferring ultimate responsibility for outcomes to One whose wisdom and power far exceed our own. It is the rest of knowing that we can stop striving to control what lies beyond our influence, and instead focus our energy on faithful response to what is within our sphere of responsibility. The phrase, "my hope comes from Him," acknowledges that human sources of hope, whether circumstances, relationships, achievements, or resources, are insufficient foundations for lasting peace and confidence. These may indeed provide temporary encouragement and practical help, But ultimate hope must be anchored in realities that transcend variables and uncertainties that characterize human existence. Tonight, as you consider where your hope has been anchored and what foundations you have been trusting for your sense of security and well-being, notice whether those foundations feel solid enough to support the full weight of your deepest concerns and fears. Perhaps you have been placing hope in your ability to control outcomes through careful planning, in other people's ability to provide the love and support you need, in your own strength and competence to handle whatever challenges may arise, or in circumstances remaining favorable to your goals and dreams. While these may all be legitimate sources of encouragement and practical help, they become problematic when they bear more weight than they were designed to carry. Human abilities, relationships, and circumstances are all limited and subject to change, making them insufficient foundations for the kind of unshakable peace and confidence that enable genuine rest even in the midst of uncertainty. The practice of finding rest in God involves a gradual process of transferring hope from these limited sources to the unlimited resources of divine character and commitment. This does not mean becoming careless about relationships, irresponsible about planning, or passive about using our gifts and abilities. Rather, it means engaging with these aspects of life from a foundation of trust in divine faithfulness rather than from anxiety about whether they will prove adequate for our needs. As you feel your body settling into the comfort of your bed and your breathing beginning to deepen into the rhythm of approaching sleep, practice this transfer of hope from human securities to divine faithfulness. Picture yourself discovering that the foundation you thought was solid was actually shifting sand, but that beneath it lies bedrock that cannot be moved by any force. You need not fear that this bedrock will prove inadequate for supporting whatever weight you place upon it, because it is not dependent on external circumstances for its stability and strength. The fortress of divine care surrounds you not only when life is going well, but especially when circumstances feel threatening or chaotic. The rock of divine character provides solid ground, not only when you feel strong and capable, but particularly when you feel overwhelmed and inadequate. The refuge of divine love offers safety, not only when human relationships are supportive, but especially when you feel alone or misunderstood. Rest tonight in the assurance that your hope is anchored in realities that cannot be shaken by temporary circumstances, no matter how significant those circumstances may seem from your current perspective. The salvation, honor, and security that matter most deeply are not dependent on your ability to achieve desired outcomes or avoid unwanted difficulties, but rest securely in the hands of the one who has committed himself to your ultimate well-being and the full fulfillment of his good purposes in and through your life. Psalm 73 addresses one of the most troubling sources of anxiety for many thoughtful people: the apparent prosperity of those who seem to live without regard for divine will, while those who seek to live faithfully often struggle with difficulty and uncertainty. The psalmist begins with honest acknowledgement of this troubling reality. But as for me, my feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my foothold, for I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. This confession validates the experience of those who struggle with questions about divine justice and fairness. It can be deeply disturbing to work hard, live honestly, treat others with kindness, and still face financial stress, health problems, relationship difficulties, or other challenges, while observing others who seem to achieve success through means that violate principles of integrity and compassion. This observation can create anxiety, not only about practical matters, but about whether faithfulness is ultimately worthwhile or whether divine promises can be trusted. The psalmist describes the internal turmoil that such observations can create. When I tried to understand all this, it troubled me deeply. This honest acknowledgement gives permission for believers to admit their own struggles with doubts about divine justice without pretending that such questions are evidence of weak faith or spiritual immaturity. Some of life's deepest challenges cannot be resolved through simple answers or superficial optimism, but require wrestling with complex realities that test the foundations of trust and hope. But the psalm takes a crucial turn when the writer describes entering the sanctuary of God and gaining a different perspective on these troubling realities. Till I entered the sanctuary of God, then I understood their final destiny. This shift in perspective comes not through rational analysis alone, but through worship that places immediate observations within the context of eternal realities and divine purposes that extend beyond current circumstances. The sanctuary represents not only a physical place of worship, but also the spiritual space created when we deliberately turn our attention from immediate frustrations to ultimate truths about divine character and purposes. In this sacred space, temporary inequities can be seen within the larger framework of divine justice that operates according to timescales and principles that transcend human understanding. The psalmist's conclusion reflects this transformed perspective. Yet I am always with you. You hold me by my right hand. You guide me with your counsel, and afterward you will take me into glory. Whom have I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. This beautiful declaration shifts focus from comparison with others to appreciation for divine presence and guidance. The image of being held by the right hand suggests intimate care and support that provide security even when external circumstances feel unstable. The promise of divine counsel offers hope that wisdom is available for navigating complex decisions and challenging situations, even when the way forward is not immediately clear. The acknowledgement that my flesh and my heart may fail honestly faces human limitations and mortality without being overwhelmed by despair. Instead, it finds in divine faithfulness a source of strength that is renewable rather than depleting, permanent rather than temporary, and sufficient for whatever challenges may arise regardless of how our natural capacities may be affected by age, illness, or other factors beyond our control. Tonight, if you find yourself troubled by questions about fairness, justice, or whether faithfulness is ultimately worthwhile, take comfort in this psalm's honest acknowledgement of such struggles, alongside its ultimate testimony to divine faithfulness. You need not pretend that life's inequities do not bother you, or that you have easy answers to complex questions about suffering and divine purposes. Instead, you can follow the psalmist's example of bringing your questions and frustrations into the sanctuary of divine presence, where immediate concerns can be placed within the larger context of eternal love and ultimate justice. This sanctuary is not a place of escape from reality, but a place of encounter with deeper realities that provide perspective on surface appearances. As you consider the areas where life seems unfair or where your faithfulness seems to go unrewarded, while others appear to prosper through questionable means, practice holding these observations lightly rather than allowing them to create anxiety about divine character or your own choices. The timeline of divine justice operates according to principles and schedules that transcend human understanding, and apparent temporary inequities do not negate ultimate divine faithfulness. Picture yourself entering a sanctuary where earthly perspectives give way to heavenly ones, where temporary circumstances are seen within the context of eternal purposes, and where questions that seemed overwhelming from ground level become manageable when viewed from a higher vantage point. This sanctuary is always accessible through prayer, worship, meditation on Scripture, and the deliberate choice to focus attention on divine character rather than human circumstances. Rest tonight in the assurance that you are held by the right hand of the One who sees all things clearly, knows all things perfectly, and works all things together for ultimate good. Your faithfulness is not in vain, your integrity is not wasted, and your trust in divine goodness is not misplaced, even when immediate evidence might seem to suggest otherwise. The strength of your heart and your portion forever rest not in the fairness of current circumstances, but in the faithfulness of the One who holds both time and eternity in his hands. As our journey through the night continues, and these ancient words of wisdom settle into the deep places of our hearts, let us turn to Psalm 84, which captures the longing of the human soul for divine presence and the satisfaction that comes from finding our ultimate home in relationship with God. How lovely is your dwelling place, Lord Almighty! My soul yearns, even faints, for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. This passionate expression of spiritual hunger speaks to something essential about human nature. We are created for connection with the divine, and no earthly satisfaction can fully fill the void that only divine presence can occupy. The yearning described here is not mere religious sentiment, but the deep recognition that our souls require spiritual nourishment, just as surely as our bodies require physical sustenance. The phrase, "My soul yearns, even faints," captures the intensity of this spiritual longing, comparing it to physical hunger or thirst that becomes so intense it affects our entire being. This comparison suggests that anxiety, restlessness, and dissatisfaction may sometimes be symptoms of spiritual hunger, rather than evidence of external problems that need to be solved through changed circumstances or increased resources. Better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than dwell in the tents of the wicked. This verse establishes a hierarchy of values that places proximity to divine presence above all other considerations, including comfort, status, or material advantage. A doorkeeper was one of the lowest positions in the temple hierarchy, yet the psalmist would choose this humble role in God's house over luxury and honor in environments that lack divine presence. This perspective offers profound comfort to those who sometimes feel that their commitment to spiritual values puts them at a disadvantage in worldly terms. Perhaps you have made choices based on integrity that cost you financial advancement, maintained honesty that resulted in criticism from others, or pursued purposes that serve eternal values rather than immediate gratification. This psalm suggests that such choices reflect proper understanding of what matters most deeply. Blessed are those whose strength is in you, whose hearts are set on pilgrimage. The image of pilgrimage speaks to the understanding that life is a journey toward deeper spiritual maturity and closer divine relationship, rather than a destination where we expect to achieve perfect comfort and satisfaction. Those whose hearts are set on pilgrimage have learned to find meaning in the journey itself, rather than demanding that every step be pleasant or every circumstance favorable. This pilgrimage perspective can transform our relationship with difficulty and uncertainty. Instead of viewing challenges as evidence that something has gone wrong or that we have failed to achieve proper security, we can see them as normal parts of the spiritual journey that often contribute to growth, character development, and deeper appreciation for divine grace. As they pass through the valley of Baca, they make it a place of springs. The autumn rains also cover it with pools. The valley of Baca was known as a dry, difficult place that pilgrims had to traverse on their way to Jerusalem. But this verse suggests that those whose strength is in the Lord can find sources of refreshment even in the most challenging circumstances, and that their presence can even create blessing for others who follow the same difficult path. This beautiful imagery speaks to the way divine grace can transform our experience of life's inevitable valleys of difficulty. While we cannot avoid all hardship or always choose easy paths, we can learn to find springs of grace, hope, and even joy in the midst of challenging circumstances. Sometimes these springs appear as unexpected helps that sustain us through difficulty, sometimes as insights that give meaning to suffering, and sometimes as opportunities to provide encouragement to others facing similar struggles. For the Lord God is a sun and shield. The Lord bestows favor and honor. No good thing does he withhold from those who walk uprightly. This promise addresses two of the deepest human needs, illumination and protection. The sun metaphor speaks to divine guidance that provides clarity for decision-making and warmth that sustains hope even during cold seasons of life. The shield metaphor speaks to divine protection that may not prevent all difficulty, but provides security for the essential aspects of who we are and what we are called to become. The promise that no good thing is withheld from those who walk uprightly does not mean that faithful people receive everything they want or avoid all disappointment. Rather, It means that divine wisdom determines what constitutes genuine good and provides accordingly, sometimes by granting our requests, and sometimes by denying them in favor of better gifts we had not thought to ask for. Tonight, as you rest in these images of divine dwelling, spiritual pilgrimage, and faithful provision, consider what it might mean for your soul to find its ultimate home in divine presence rather than in external circumstances. This does not require becoming indifferent to legitimate earthly concerns or relationships, but it does mean finding your deepest security and satisfaction in realities that transcend temporary situations. Picture yourself as a pilgrim who has been carrying anxiety about whether the journey is leading in the right direction, whether adequate supplies will be available for the challenges ahead, or whether the destination will prove worth the difficulties encountered along the way. Now imagine discovering that the journey itself is transforming you in ways that are more valuable than reaching any external destination, and that divine presence accompanies every step, regardless of how difficult the terrain may become. The springs that appear in valleys of difficulty are not always dramatic or obvious, but they are always sufficient for continuing the journey. Sometimes they appear as small encouragements that restore hope, sometimes as practical helps that address immediate needs, sometimes as insights that provide meaning for suffering, and sometimes simply as the awareness of divine presence that reminds you that you are not walking alone. As your breathing deepens and your body relaxes into rest, allow yourself to experience the peace that comes from knowing that your ultimate dwelling place is secure, regardless of how temporary earthly accommodations may prove to be. The Lord, who is both sun and shield, provides both the guidance you need for tomorrow's decisions and the protection you need for tonight's rest. No good thing will be withheld from your journey toward spiritual maturity and divine intimacy, even if the path includes valleys that initially seem barren and difficult. Rest tonight as a beloved pilgrim whose journey is guided by perfect wisdom, sustained by unfailing grace, and directed toward a destination more wonderful than anything you could imagine or achieve through your own efforts. The dwelling place of divine presence is not a location you must reach through perfect performance, but a relationship you can enter through simple trust, available now and forever to all whose hearts yearn for authentic spiritual connection. From Psalm 90 comes this prayer that acknowledges both human limitations and divine eternality. Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. This simple request contains profound insight into how awareness of mortality can actually increase rather than decrease our sense of peace and purpose, providing perspective that reduces anxiety about temporary concerns while increasing appreciation for eternal values. The instruction to number our days is not about becoming morbidly preoccupied with death, but about developing realistic awareness of the finite nature of earthly life and using this awareness to make wise choices about how to invest limited time and energy. When we truly grasp that our days are numbered, trivial concerns naturally lose their power to generate excessive anxiety, while important matters receive appropriate attention and priority. This perspective can be profoundly liberating for those who struggle with anxiety about matters that, while real and legitimate, are not ultimately significant enough to justify the emotional energy they consume. The awareness that life is short can help us distinguish between concerns that deserve careful attention and those that represent unnecessary worry about things beyond our control or too minor to warrant such investment of emotional resources. The goal of numbering our days is to gain a heart of wisdom, which suggests that this awareness leads not to despair about brevity of life, but to clarity about what matters most deeply. Wisdom, in biblical terms, is not merely intellectual knowledge, but the practical ability to live well, to make choices that align with ultimate values rather than immediate pressures, and to find meaning and satisfaction even in the midst of temporal limitations. A heart of wisdom learns to hold earthly concerns lightly without becoming indifferent to them, to plan responsibly for the future without being anxious about outcomes beyond our control, to invest deeply in relationships while accepting their temporary nature, and to work diligently for meaningful purposes, while recognizing that ultimate significance comes from divine approval rather than human achievement. This wisdom also includes the ability to accept human limitations with grace rather than frustration. The person who has learned to number their days understands that they cannot solve every problem, help every person in need, achieve every goal they might desire, or avoid every form of suffering. This acceptance is not resignation, but the kind of realism that enables focused effort on what is truly possible and important, rather than dissipated energy on what lies beyond reasonable human capacity. Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. This declaration places human mortality within the context of divine eternality, finding comfort not in the permanence of earthly life, but in the unchanging nature of the one who transcends all temporal limitations. The image of God as a dwelling place throughout all generations suggests that while individual lives are brief, human existence is held within the context of divine purposes that span centuries and millennia. Our individual stories are part of a larger narrative that began before we arrived and will continue after we depart. But this larger story gives meaning to our temporary participation rather than diminishing its significance. You turn people back to dust, saying, "Return to dust, you mortals. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night." This stark acknowledgement of human mortality might initially seem discouraging, but placed within the context of divine eternality, it provides perspective that can actually reduce anxiety about temporal concerns. When we understand that divine perspective operates on timescales that dwarf human experience, immediate setbacks and delays lose some of their power to generate despair. What seems like unbearable waiting from human perspective may be merely a brief moment from divine perspective. What appears to be devastating failure in the short term may be part of a longer process of development and refinement that serves ultimate purposes. Tonight, as you consider the brevity of life and the temporality of current concerns, notice whether this perspective brings anxiety or relief. For many people, awareness of mortality initially increases anxiety because it highlights the uncertainty of future outcomes and the impossibility of controlling how much time remains for achieving desired goals. But as this awareness deepens into wisdom, it often becomes a source of peace because it places immediate concerns within proper perspective. The challenges you face tonight, while real and important, are temporary features of a brief earthly journey rather than permanent conditions that will last forever. The disappointments that seem so significant from your current vantage point may prove to be minor setbacks when viewed from the perspective of eternity. The achievements you strive for, while worthy of appropriate effort, need not bear the weight of providing ultimate meaning or security for your existence. Picture yourself standing on a mountaintop, where you can see both the valley where you have been traveling and the vast landscape that stretches beyond it. From this elevated perspective, obstacles that loomed large while you are walking among them appear as small features in a much larger terrain. This is the kind of perspective that comes from numbering our days and gaining a heart of wisdom. As you feel your body relaxing into the rhythm of rest and your mind beginning to release its grip on the day's concerns, practice holding your current challenges within the context of both divine eternality and human mortality. This double perspective, awareness that life is brief and awareness that God is eternal, can provide both urgency about what matters most and peace about outcomes that ultimately rest in divine hands. The wisdom that comes from numbering our days includes the ability to rest well, knowing that sleep itself is a daily reminder of human limitations and divine faithfulness. Each night, we practice the kind of trust that releases control over outcomes and depends on grace for restoration and renewal. Each morning, we receive fresh evidence that divine provision is sufficient for another day's challenges and opportunities. Rest tonight in the assurance that your brief life is held within the context of eternal love and infinite wisdom, that your temporary concerns are known and cared for by the one who transcends all temporal limitations, and that the meaning of your existence is not threatened by its brevity, but is actually enhanced by being part of divine purposes that span from everlasting to everlasting. The gentle rhythm of night continues around you, and Psalm 103 offers this invitation to gratitude and praise that can transform anxious hearts into peaceful ones. Praise the Lord, my soul. All my inmost being, praise his holy name. Praise the Lord, my soul, and forget not all his benefits. This call to remember divine benefits speaks to the human tendency to focus on present problems while forgetting past provisions, to be overwhelmed by current challenges while losing sight of previous evidence of divine faithfulness. The practice of deliberately recalling and rehearsing divine benefits is not mere positive thinking, but a discipline that aligns our perspective with reality by giving proper attention to the full scope of our experience, rather than just its most recent or most troubling aspects. Who forgives all your sins and heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from the pit and crowns you with love and compassion, who satisfies your desires with good things so that your youth is renewed like the eagles. This comprehensive list of divine benefits addresses multiple levels of human need: spiritual forgiveness, physical healing, emotional restoration, relational love, and renewed vitality. The promise of forgiveness speaks to the anxiety that comes from guilt, shame, or the sense that past failures disqualify us from divine blessing or human acceptance. This forgiveness is not earned through perfect behavior, but is freely offered based on divine character and grace. The healing mentioned here may be physical, emotional, or spiritual, and often works gradually through natural means rather than dramatically through supernatural intervention. The image of life being redeemed from the pit suggests rescue from circumstances or patterns that seemed hopeless, transformation of situations that appeared to be permanently destructive, and restoration of meaning and purpose after seasons of confusion or despair. The crown of love and compassion speaks to divine care that treats each person with dignity and tenderness, regardless of their achievements or failures. The satisfaction of desires with good things does not mean that every want is immediately gratified, but rather that deeper longings for meaning, connection, security, and purpose are met through divine provision in ways that sometimes exceed what we thought to ask for. The renewal of youth like the eagles speaks to restoration of energy, hope, and capacity for engagement with life, even after seasons of depletion or discouragement. The Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love. He will not always accuse, nor will he harbor his anger forever. He does not treat us as our sins deserve or repay us according to our iniquities. This description of divine character addresses some of the deepest fears that can create anxiety in sensitive hearts. The fear that divine love is conditional on performance, that mistakes result in permanent rejection, or that divine patience has limits that might be exceeded by repeated failures. The promise that God is slow to anger and abounding in love suggests that divine response to human failure is characterized more by patience and grace than by condemnation and punishment. The assurance that he will not always accuse or harbor anger forever speaks to the possibility of genuine restoration and fresh starts, rather than permanent consequences for temporary failures. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. As a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. For he knows how we are formed. He remembers that we are dust. This beautiful imagery speaks to the completeness of divine forgiveness and the tenderness of divine understanding. The metaphor of removing transgressions, as far as the east is from the west, suggests a distance so vast that it cannot be measured or traversed, implying that forgiven failures cannot return to condemn or accuse us. The comparison to a father's compassion for his children speaks to understanding that takes into account limitations, immaturity, and the normal struggles that accompany growth and development. The reminder that God knows how we are formed and remembers that we are dust addresses the anxiety that comes from feeling that divine expectations are impossibly high, or that our struggles with weakness indicate spiritual failure. This divine understanding does not excuse carelessness or rebellion, but it does provide comfort for those who are genuinely striving to grow while dealing with ongoing limitations and imperfections. Tonight, as you practice this discipline of remembering divine benefits and rehearsing divine character, notice how such remembrance affects your emotional state and your perspective on current challenges. Anxiety often flourishes in the soil of selective memory that focuses exclusively on problems while ignoring evidences of divine faithfulness. The practice of gratitude and praise serves as an antidote to this selective attention by deliberately broadening our awareness to include the full range of our experience. Consider making a mental inventory of divine benefits you have experienced, times when provision appeared just when it was needed, relationships that brought healing after seasons of loneliness, insights that provided clarity during confusion, strength that sustained you through challenges you did not think you could handle, or peace that came in the midst of circumstances that should have produced panic. These benefits may have come through natural means rather than supernatural interventions, through human agents rather than angelic visitations, and through gradual processes rather than dramatic moments. But their source is nonetheless divine, and their reality is evidence of ongoing care and faithfulness that can be trusted for future challenges as well as appreciated for past provisions. As your breathing deepens and your body settles into rest, let gratitude for past benefits and confidence in divine character replace anxiety about future uncertainties. Picture yourself as someone who's been keeping careful track of problems and challenges while neglecting to notice gifts and provisions, now discovering a treasure chest of divine benefits that has been accumulating throughout your entire life. The God who has forgiven, healed, redeemed, crowned, satisfied, and renewed you in the past is the same God who will provide what you need for tomorrow's challenges. The divine character that has been patient with your weaknesses, compassionate toward your struggles, and faithful in keeping promises despite your failures is unchanging and can be depended upon for whatever lies ahead. Rest tonight in the embrace of this divine compassion that knows exactly how you are formed, understands perfectly the challenges you face, and loves you far more deeply than you love yourself. Your sleep can be peaceful because your life is held securely in hands that are both infinitely powerful and infinitely tender, both perfectly just and perfectly merciful, both completely holy and completely devoted to your ultimate well-being. As the night grows deeper and these ancient songs of faith continue to wash over your spirit like gentle waves upon a peaceful shore, let us turn to Psalm 121, which begins with a question that captures the universal human search for help and security. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. This simple question and answer contain profound truth about the source of ultimate security and assistance. The mountains in ancient times were often associated with strength, permanence, and divine presence, but even they are insufficient sources of help when compared to their Creator. The psalm immediately redirects our attention from created things, no matter how impressive or enduring they may seem, to the Creator who transcends all limitations and has power over all circumstances. The title, Maker of Heaven and Earth, emphasizes both the scope of divine power and the intimacy of divine care. The God who created galaxies and governs the movement of planets is the same God who attends to individual human needs and concerns. This combination of transcendence and immanence provides both the assurance that adequate help is available and the comfort that such help comes from one who cares personally about our well-being. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. This promise addresses one of the deepest anxieties that can disrupt peaceful rest, the fear that help will not be available when we need it most, that we will face our greatest challenges alone, or that divine attention will be distracted by more important matters when we are most vulnerable. The image of not letting your foot slip speaks to divine protection that prevents not only major disasters, but also the smaller failures and setbacks that can accumulate into significant problems over time. This protection is not a guarantee that life will be without challenge or disappointment, but rather an assurance that divine care is actively engaged in providing stability and support for the journey ahead. The promise that our divine helper neither slumbers nor sleeps directly addresses the anxiety that often increases during nighttime, hours when we feel most alone and vulnerable. While human helpers may be unavailable due to sleep, distance, or their own limitations, divine help is constantly accessible and never compromised by factors that might limit human assistance. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. This beautiful imagery speaks to comprehensive protection that covers all times and circumstances. The shade at your right hand suggests divine presence that is close, constant, and specifically positioned to provide protection from threats you might not even be aware of. The reference to protection from both sun and moon encompasses the full spectrum of potential harm, acknowledging that dangers can come during seasons of plenty as well as seasons of want, during times of success as well as times of struggle. The sun's heat could represent the pressures that come with prosperity, recognition, or favorable circumstances, while the moon's influence could represent the subtler threats that operate during vulnerable or difficult periods. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going both now and forevermore. This comprehensive promise of divine protection addresses both present and future security, both daily activities and life transitions, both immediate concerns and long-term well-being. The promise to keep from all harm does not mean that believers will never experience difficulty, pain, loss, or even tragedy. Rather, it means that ultimate harm, the kind that could destroy what matters most deeply about who we are and what we are called to become, is prevented by divine care. Temporary setbacks, painful experiences, and challenging circumstances may indeed be part of our journey, but they cannot inflict the kind of ultimate damage that would undermine divine purposes for our lives. The phrase coming and going captures the rhythm of daily life with its constant transitions and changes. Divine protection accompanies us not only during dramatic moments of crisis, but also during routine activities and ordinary transitions that make up the majority of our earthly experience. This protection extends both now and forevermore, bridging temporal and eternal security in a promise that transcends the limitations of earthly life. Tonight, as you rest in these promises of divine protection and care, consider how this assurance might change your relationship with the anxieties that often accompany nighttime hours. The fears that seem magnified in darkness, concerns about safety, health, relationships, or future challenges can be placed within the context of divine watchfulness that never sleeps and never fails. Picture yourself as a traveler who has been anxiously scanning the horizon for signs of danger, constantly checking maps and supplies, and struggling to rest because of fears about what threats might emerge during vulnerable hours of sleep. Now imagine discovering that a perfectly capable and completely trustworthy guard has been assigned to watch over you, someone whose vigilance never wavers and whose power is more than adequate for handling any threat that might arise. This divine watchfulness is not distant or impersonal, but intimate and caring, like the protection of a loving parent who watches over a sleeping child. The help that comes from the Maker of heaven and earth is available not only for major crises, but for daily challenges, not only for dramatic interventions, but for quiet strength that sustains faithful living through ordinary circumstances. As your body relaxes into the safety of divine protection, and your mind releases its grip on concerns about tomorrow's challenges, rest in the assurance that your coming and going are watched over by one whose care never fails and whose power never diminishes. The same divine attention that sustains the movements of planets and the cycles of seasons is focused on the details of your life with personal love and commitment to your well-being. The foot that might slip finds solid ground, because divine strength upholds what human effort alone cannot secure. A path that seemed uncertain becomes navigable, because divine wisdom illuminates the way forward. The rest that seemed impossible becomes natural, because divine protection creates the safety necessary for genuine peace. Sleep well tonight, knowing that the one who neither slumbers nor sleeps maintains perfect watch over every aspect of your existence, both now and forevermore. From the depths of human desperation comes Psalm 130, which begins with a cry that resonates with anyone who has felt overwhelmed by circumstances beyond their control. Out of the depths I cry to you, Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. The depths mentioned here represent more than physical location. They symbolize the emotional, spiritual, and psychological places where hope seems to have disappeared and human resources feel entirely inadequate. These are the valleys where anxiety has evolved into despair, where worry has given way to a sense of being completely overwhelmed by circumstances that seem impossible to change or escape. The repetition of Lord in this opening cry suggests the urgency and intensity of someone reaching out for help when all other sources of assistance have proved inadequate. This is not casual prayer or routine religious observance, but the desperate cry of someone who has discovered that divine intervention may be the only hope for rescue from an impossible situation. The request that God's ears be attentive acknowledges both the reality of divine care and the human need for assurance that our cries are heard and taken seriously. When we are in the depths, one of our greatest fears is that our pain is invisible, our struggles are unnoticed, or our need for help is insignificant compared to greater problems elsewhere in the world. If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, so that we may fear you. This acknowledgement addresses one of the sources of despair that often accompanies anxiety, the sense that our struggles may be divine punishment for past failures, or that we have forfeited the right to divine assistance through our inadequate faithfulness. The rhetorical question, who could stand? If divine justice operated on the basis of perfect performance, acknowledges the universal reality of human failure and the impossibility of earning divine favor through flawless behavior. This recognition, rather than increasing despair, actually provides the foundation for hope by pointing toward forgiveness that is based on divine character rather than human merit. The promise that with you there is forgiveness offers relief not only from guilt about past failures, but also from the anxiety that comes from believing that current struggles indicate divine displeasure or abandonment. This forgiveness is not earned through perfect repentance or guaranteed freedom from future failure, but is freely offered based on divine mercy and grace. I wait for the Lord, my whole being waits, and in his word I put my hope. I wait for the Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning, more than watchmen wait for the morning. This beautiful imagery captures the intensity of hope that can exist even in the midst of ongoing difficulty. The comparison to watchmen waiting for morning speaks to hope that is based not on immediate evidence of change, but on confidence that dawn will eventually come because of the reliable nature of cosmic rhythms established by divine wisdom. The watchman in the darkest hour before dawn has no immediate proof that morning is approaching, but he knows with certainty that darkness is temporary and light will return. This kind of waiting is active rather than passive, characterized by expectation rather than resignation. It involves the discipline of continuing to look toward divine intervention, even when circumstances seem to worsen rather than improve, continuing to believe in divine faithfulness, even when immediate evidence might suggest abandonment or indifference. Israel, put your hope in the Lord, for with the Lord is unfailing love, and with him is full redemption. He himself will redeem Israel from all their sins. This concluding declaration moves from personal testimony to communal encouragement, from individual experience of divine faithfulness to assurance that such faithfulness is available to all who seek it. The promise of unfailing love addresses the fear that divine affection might be withdrawn if we fail to meet certain standards, or if our struggles prove more persistent than expected. This love is described as unfailing, not because we are particularly lovable, but because divine character is unchanging and divine commitment to our well-being is not dependent on our performance. The assurance of full redemption speaks to divine power that can restore what has been lost, repair what has been broken, and transform what seems hopelessly damaged into something beautiful and useful. This redemption often works gradually through natural means rather than dramatically through supernatural intervention, but its reality is nonetheless transformative for those who experience it. Tonight, if you find yourself in depths of any kind, emotional, spiritual, relational, or circumstantial, take comfort in this psalm's testimony that such depths are not beyond the reach of divine mercy and intervention. The God who hears cries from the deepest places is the same God who has power to lift, restore, and redeem what seems hopelessly lost or damaged. The waiting that this psalm describes is not empty time spent hoping for change, but purposeful preparation for divine action that may come in unexpected ways and according to timelines that transcend human understanding. Like the watchman who knows that dawn will come even during the darkest hours, you can maintain hope even when immediate circumstances provide little reason for optimism. Consider what it might mean to wait for divine intervention with the intensity of watchmen waiting for morning. This waiting combines patient endurance with eager expectation, realistic assessment of current darkness with confident anticipation of coming light, and honest acknowledgement of present difficulty with unshakable hope in ultimate deliverance. As you lie here in the physical darkness that surrounds your rest, let it remind you that darkness is temporary by nature, and that divine faithfulness operates according to rhythms more reliable than sunrise. The depths from which you may be crying out tonight are known and accessible to the one whose love never fails and whose power to redeem extends to every situation that might seem hopeless from human perspective. Picture yourself as a watchman who has been scanning the horizon for signs of dawn, maintaining vigilance through the long night hours, and now beginning to sense the subtle changes that herald approaching morning. The darkness that seemed so permanent and overwhelming is already beginning to yield to light that started its journey hours ago, but is only now becoming visible to human eyes. Rest tonight in the assurance that divine redemption is already at work in ways you cannot yet perceive, that unfailing love surrounds you, even when you cannot feel it, and that the dawn of divine intervention approaches even when darkness seems most complete. Your cry from the depths has been heard. Your waiting is not in vain, and the morning of divine deliverance will come as surely as the sun rises each day to chase away the darkness of night. As we continue this gentle journey through the treasures of divine wisdom designed to bring peace to anxious hearts and rest to weary souls, let us turn to Psalm 139, which reveals the intimate nature of divine knowledge and care in words that can transform our understanding of what it means to be truly known and loved. You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. These opening verses address one of the deepest human longings, the desire to be truly known by someone who has the wisdom to understand us completely and the love to accept us unconditionally. For many people, the fear of being truly known creates anxiety because past experiences have taught them that human knowledge often leads to judgment, rejection, or attempts to control and manipulate. But divine knowledge is fundamentally different from human scrutiny. It comes not from the desire to find fault or to gather information for strategic advantage, but from perfect love that seeks to understand in order to bless, protect, and guide. This knowledge is comprehensive, encompassing not only our actions and words, but also our thoughts, motivations, and the deepest desires of our hearts. The awareness that God knows when we sit and when we rise, that He perceives our thoughts from afar and is familiar with all our ways. might initially feel threatening to those who are conscious of their failures and imperfections. But the context of this song reveals that such knowledge is a source of comfort rather than condemnation, security rather than anxiety. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for I to attain. The image of being hemmed in behind and before speaks to divine protection that surrounds us on every side, creating a shelter of care that guards both our past and our future. This is not the confinement of a prison, but the security of a sanctuary, not limitation of freedom, but provision of safety within which true freedom can flourish. The laying on of divine hands suggests blessing, commissioning, and empowerment rather than restraint or punishment. In ancient Near Eastern culture, the laying on of hands was associated with the transfer of authority, the impartation of blessing, and the commissioning for important work. This divine touch speaks to our value, our purpose, and our empowerment for meaningful participation in divine purposes. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. This comprehensive presence addresses the fear of abandonment that often underlies anxiety about the future. Whether our circumstances take us to heights of success or depths of failure, to familiar territories or unknown regions, divine presence remains constant and divine care remains available. The promise that divine hands will guide and hold us regardless of location or circumstance provides security that transcends any particular situation we might face. This is not merely intellectual knowledge about divine omnipresence, but personal assurance of divine commitment to our well-being wherever life's journey might lead. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. This passage speaks directly to those times when circumstances feel overwhelming, when confusion seems impenetrable, or when the future appears completely uncertain. The darkness that obscures our vision and creates anxiety about what lies ahead is perfectly transparent to divine sight. What seems like night to us is as clear as day to the one who guides our steps. This truth can provide tremendous comfort during seasons when we feel lost, confused, or unable to see the way forward. The guidance we need for wise decisions is available even when we cannot perceive it clearly, and the protection we need for safe passage through difficult circumstances is operative even when we cannot sense its presence. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. This celebration of divine craftsmanship addresses the self-doubt and insecurity that often fuel anxiety about whether we are adequate for the challenges we face. The God who knit us together in the womb designed us with intention and purpose, creating not defective products, but wonderful works that reflect divine creativity and wisdom. The phrase fearfully and wonderfully made suggests that we are created with both complexity that inspires awe and beauty that reflects divine artistry. This is not a claim of perfection, but an acknowledgement of value, purpose, and divine intention in our creation. Understanding ourselves as God's wonderful works can transform our self-perception from anxiety-producing inadequacy to confidence-building appreciation for divine design. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God! How vast is the sum of them! This assurance that our days are known and ordained before they are lived provides perspective on divine sovereignty that can reduce anxiety about uncertain futures. This does not mean that human choices are irrelevant or that we are merely passive participants in predetermined scripts, but rather that divine wisdom has taken all possibilities into account and can work all circumstances together for ultimate good. The preciousness of divine thoughts toward us suggests that we occupy divine attention, not as problems to be solved or burdens to be carried, but as beloved creations, who are the objects of constant divine affection and concern. The vastness of these thoughts indicates that divine care for us is not minimal or occasional, but comprehensive and ongoing. Tonight, as you rest in the awareness of being completely known and absolutely loved, notice how this divine knowledge affects your sense of security and peace. The God who knows your every thought and is familiar with all your ways is not shocked by your struggles, disappointed by your failures, or surprised by your needs. He sees all of this within the context of his creative intention for your life and his commitment to bringing that intention to fulfillment. Consider what it means to be hemmed in behind and before by divine protection, to have divine hands laid upon you in blessing and commissioning, and to know that darkness cannot hide you from the one whose guidance you need most. These truths provide security that transcends any particular circumstance you might face, and peace that surpasses any temporary anxiety about uncertain outcomes. Picture yourself as someone who has been trying to hide their struggles, mask their weaknesses, and present a perfect image to gain acceptance and approval. Now imagine discovering that perfect knowledge of all your imperfections already exists, alongside perfect love that accepts you unconditionally. The exhausting work of hiding and pretending can be replaced with the rest that comes from being fully known and completely loved. As your breathing deepens and your body relaxes into the safety of divine knowledge and care, rest in the assurance that the one who created your inmost being has wonderful thoughts toward you that are too numerous to count. Your value does not depend on your performance. Your security does not depend on your circumstances. And your future does not depend on your ability to control outcomes. Sleep peacefully tonight, surrounded by presence that no darkness can escape, held by hands that no circumstance can weaken, and loved by the one who knew you completely before you drew your first breath, and who will continue to guide and protect you until you draw your last. You are fearfully and wonderfully made, and all your days are written in the book of the one whose thoughts toward you are precious beyond measure. Psalm 145 offers this beautiful testimony to divine faithfulness that spans generations and circumstances. The Lord is trustworthy in all he promises, and faithful in all he does. The Lord upholds all who fall and lifts up all who are bowed down. This declaration addresses two of the most persistent sources of anxiety that can disrupt peaceful rest, doubt about whether divine promises can be relied upon when circumstances seem to contradict them, and fear about what will happen if we fail or find ourselves overwhelmed by challenges beyond our capacity to handle. The promise that God is trustworthy in all he promises does not mean that every prayer receives the specific answer we request, or that life unfolds exactly according to our hopes and plans. Rather, it means that divine character is completely reliable, and that promises made by God will be fulfilled according to divine wisdom and timing, which often exceed human understanding. This trustworthiness becomes a foundation for peace that remains stable even when external circumstances fluctuate dramatically. When we know that divine promises are absolutely reliable, we can rest in them even when immediate evidence might seem to suggest that God has forgotten us, or that our situation is beyond divine help or concern. The faithfulness of God in all he does speaks to divine character that remains consistent across all situations and circumstances. This faithfulness is not dependent on our performance, our understanding, or our ability to cooperate with divine purposes. It flows from divine nature rather than human merit, and therefore provides security that cannot be lost through failure or forfeited through weakness. The promise that the Lord upholds all who fall addresses the fear that failure disqualifies us from divine care, or that making mistakes results in permanent consequences that cannot be overcome. This divine upholding is not merely restoration to previous status, but often elevation to greater strength, wisdom, and usefulness than existed before the fall occurred. The assurance that God lifts up all who are bowed down speaks to divine care for those who feel crushed by circumstances, overwhelmed by responsibilities, or depleted by prolonged struggle with challenges that seem to have no resolution. This lifting up may come gradually through renewed strength and hope, or it may come through changed circumstances, but it always flows from divine commitment to the well-being of those who trust in his care. The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. He fulfills the desires of those who fear him. He hears their cry and saves them. This promise of divine nearness addresses the loneliness and isolation that often accompany anxiety, the sense that we face our struggles alone, or that divine presence is distant and theoretical rather than immediate and practical. The nearness described here is not merely spatial, but relational, not merely intellectual, but experiential. The condition that we call on God in truth suggests not perfect theological understanding, but genuine sincerity, honest acknowledgement of our need, and authentic desire for divine assistance rather than merely casual or manipulative attempts to gain divine favor for selfish purposes. The fulfillment of desires for those who fear God does not mean that every want is immediately gratified, but rather that deeper longings for meaning, security, love, and purpose are satisfied through divine provision, often in ways that exceed what we thought to ask for or imagine. The Lord watches over all who love him, but all the wicked he will destroy. My mouth will speak in praise of the Lord. Let every creature praise his holy name forever and ever. This comprehensive divine care for those who love God provides security that extends beyond temporary circumstances to encompass ultimate safety and well-being. This watching over includes both protection from harm and provision of what is needed for spiritual and emotional flourishing. The call for universal praise acknowledges that divine faithfulness and care are not private experiences, but testimonies that can encourage others who struggle with similar challenges and concerns. Our individual experiences of divine trustworthiness become part of a larger chorus of testimony that spans cultures and generations. Tonight, as you consider the areas of your life where you most need divine faithfulness and trustworthiness, rest in these promises that have proven reliable for countless generations of believers. The God who has upheld those who fell before you and lifted up those who were bowed down throughout history is the same God who watches over your current struggles and future challenges. Consider what it means to know that divine promises are completely trustworthy, even when circumstances seem to contradict them. This trustworthiness does not depend on your ability to understand divine timing or methods, but rests securely in divine character that cannot change or fail. Picture yourself as someone who has been struggling to maintain balance while walking on uncertain ground, fearful of falling and anxious about your ability to continue moving forward. Now imagine discovering that underneath the uncertain surface lies solid bedrock that can support any weight, and that strong hands are positioned to uphold you if you stumble and lift you up if you become too weary to continue. The divine faithfulness that upholds and lifts up is not contingent on your strength, wisdom, or even faithfulness in return. It flows from divine love that remains constant, regardless of how circumstances may change, or how your capacity to cope may fluctuate. This faithfulness has sustained believers through every conceivable difficulty, and will continue to do so for challenges you have not yet imagined. As your body settles into rest, and your mind releases its grip on concerns about tomorrow's challenges, rest also in the assurance that the one who is near to all who call upon him in truth is present with you now, aware of your specific concerns, and committed to providing what you need for both tonight's peace and tomorrow's challenges. Sleep peacefully, knowing that you are watched over by love that never fails, upheld by strength that never diminishes, and surrounded by faithfulness that has proven reliable for generations and will continue to be trustworthy for whatever lies ahead in your own journey. Let every breath become a quiet prayer of gratitude for divine faithfulness that surpasses human understanding and provides security that transcends all earthly uncertainties. As our peaceful journey through the night continues, and these ancient words of comfort settle into the deepest places of our hearts, let us close with Psalm 4, which offers this gentle benediction for troubled souls seeking rest. Answer me when I call to you, my righteous God. Give me relief from my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer. This opening cry acknowledges the reality of distress while simultaneously expressing confidence that divine response is both possible and reliable. The combination of honest acknowledgement of difficulty with expectant faith in divine care provides a model for approaching God during seasons of anxiety without either denying legitimate concerns or being overwhelmed by them. In peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. These final words of the psalm provide, perhaps, the most beautiful and practical benediction for anyone whose anxiety interferes with peaceful rest. The peace described here is not the absence of external challenges, but the presence of internal security that comes from knowing that ultimate safety rests in divine hands rather than human effort or favorable circumstances. The phrase, "you alone," emphasizes the exclusivity of divine provision for genuine security. While human relationships, material resources, and external circumstances may all contribute to our sense of well-being, they are insufficient foundations for the kind of deep peace that enables truly restorative rest. This peace comes only from divine sources and is therefore available even when other sources of comfort are absent or inadequate. The promise that God makes us dwell in safety speaks to security that is not merely temporary protection, but permanent residence in divine care. This dwelling in safety is not a location we must achieve through perfect behavior or spiritual accomplishment, but a relationship we enter through simple trust in divine character and promises. Tonight, as we conclude this extended meditation on divine wisdom and care, let these words from Psalm 4 become your personal benediction. In peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. Allow the weight of worry to transfer from your shoulders to divine hands that are infinitely more capable of carrying what concerns you. Let the tension of trying to control outcomes beyond your influence give way to the relaxation that comes from entrusting those outcomes to divine wisdom and love. Release the need to solve every problem or understand every mystery before you can rest, and instead receive the gift of peace that surpasses understanding. Picture yourself lying down in perfect safety, surrounded by divine presence that never sleeps, protected by divine power that never fails, and loved by divine heart that never changes. The challenges that await tomorrow remain in the hands of the one who has proven faithful through every generation. And tonight you can rest in the assurance that whatever those challenges may be, grace will be sufficient and strength will be renewed. Your sleep tonight can be peaceful not because all your problems have been solved, but because they rest in the care of the one who specializes in working all things together for the good of those who love him. Your rest can be restorative, not because your circumstances are perfect, but because your security is anchored in the character of the one who makes you dwell in safety. In peace, lie down and sleep. In trust, release the burdens that have been weighing on your heart. In hope, anticipate the dawn that will bring fresh grace for new challenges and renewed strength for continued faithfulness. You are held, you are loved, you are safe, and you are never alone. The Lord himself makes you dwell in safety, and in this safety, may your sleep be deep, your rest complete, and your awakening filled with hope for whatever gift tomorrow may bring. Let these ancient words of wisdom continue to echo softly in your heart, as consciousness gently fades and peaceful slumber embraces your weary soul. The God who neither slumbers nor sleeps maintains perfect watch over your rest, and in his presence there is fullness of joy both now and forevermore. Sleep well, beloved child of the Most High, for you are precious in his sight, and your peace is his delight.